Chapter 22. Archons Uprooted. And when we said unto the angels, Prostrate yourselves before Adam, they fell prostrate, all save Iblis. He demurred through pride, and so became a disbeliever. Quran 23-97, Pickthall translation. The rooftop terrace at New Court was positioned partially beneath the skybox where our evening began, with our rancid meal of raven meat and champagne. However, most of it was uncovered and sitting to the east of there. The skybox was mounted unevenly on top of the two adjoined New Court buildings, as if a toddler had been lazily stacking up wooden blocks on the floor. It hovered, mounted on poles, mostly over one of the buildings, the one we'd initially entered. But part of it stuck out to the east over the other building, which had the terrace on top. And that is where we were now all assembled for the second part of tonight's ritual. The mysterious voice that had spoken through me told Rosenberg that's what we should do. I had no idea how long these ceremonies would stretch on into the future. I was in so much pain, so tired, disoriented, scared, worried, sick, hungry, and in dread of the horrors to come that my only hope was to put to death soon, without more torture or degradation. But the hope felt empty. I also anticipated that there were even worse things to be concerned with besides just what my own fate was. The signs in the heavens were ominous. The moon was huge, now with a red mass that appeared to be swelling within it. Two of them had disappeared, but there were still 4 huge stars hovering around the moon, even larger than before, with one significantly bigger than the others. Both the moon and the stars were lower in the sky than before. You might think that Rosenberg and the others would have been concerned about the possibility of others seeing us up there, especially when Scotland Yard was supposedly en route to arrest Marcia. We had actually seen, from the roof, police arriving at Mansion House next door to the northwest. Uniformed officers had gotten in position around the perimeter, preparing to perform some kind of action. We even saw a helicopter approaching in the distance. For a minute, Rosenberg did appear worried, and alerted Chesterfield, who now sat next to me on the grass, handcuffed to my wheelchair. The spook had merely shrugged his shoulders, looking scared of retaliation for failure. But then the helicopter turned around 180 degrees and went back the way it came. The policemen all got in their cars and drove away. Rosenberg patted Chesterfield on the shoulder and went back to preparing the rest of the ritual. The Lord High Admiral arrived with his escorts through the elevator, who was not wearing a costume initially, but came in a navy blue suit with a brown overcoat and a black derby. Wrinkled and decrepit, he stooped a bit, but not as much as you'd think a man his age would. His jaw quivered uncontrollably, though, and his bloodshot eyes burned with the fire of dementia on top of psychopathy. In days of his prime, he would have been among the ones raping and murdering with zeal. Tonight, his job was merely to bring the horses and their gear, all of which arrived through the service elevator. This included the carriage, stood up on its back end to fit inside, and of course the, quote, device for mating with horses. This latter item resembled the one used by Pasiphae, the wife of King Minos, to mate with the Cretan bull, made by Daedalus on the orders of Zeus. This one, the Lord High Admiral bragged to us, had been made for the set of a Spanish film, 1978's The Coming of Sin, though you might know it under alternative titles like The Violation of the Bitch or Sodomia. The terrace was designed along a grid of lines formed by stone and cement, arranged diagonally against the sides of the roof so as to form a pattern of rhombi. Within this grid were placed patches of grass, trees, and hedges enclosing larger rhombus-shaped paved areas, which were meant to be used as outdoor meeting rooms. Inside the largest of these, in the southeast corner of the terrace, the brazen horse was set up. It was put in the northeastern corner of the hedge, which was closed all around except for its northwest corner. 3 or 4 yards apart from this, in the center of the hedge, 3 velvet-covered throne-like wooden chairs, one yellow, one purple, and one black, were assembled in the eastern corner in a semicircle facing the back end of the horse. The Duke of Rothesay was seated on the left side, in the purple chair. The Baron was ensconced in a yellow throne in the middle, looking down at his crotch, petting it gently with his thumb. Rosenberg sat on the right, in the black chair. Like everyone else present, they still wore their robes and masks. Behind the thrones, 3 standards, each about 3 foot by 2 foot, hung down from a horizontal pole held up by two others. Each flag had a field matching in hue to the color of the throne it flew behind. The purple one behind the Duke showed an old man in a toga vomiting up 6 planetary sigils and a red polygon, the Superman logo again. On the black flag behind Rosenberg, there was a similar figure eating a human baby. But on the golden flag behind the Baron, there was an image of the sun inverted, with a pained expression on its face, surrounded by what appeared to be a pool of red blood. It reminded me of the sun and the moon on the Mette coffer. "I think my flag's upside down," said Baron Carrickfergus to Rosenberg. "It certainly is not," Rosenberg replied. The torches were lit, held now by the lion standing at the 3 closed corners of the hedge, and the electric lights at the top of the new court buildings were switched off. All of the butchers and ravens gathered in the southwestern corner, to the left of me, facing the 3 seats and the brazen horse. To my right, in the southeast, aligned with St. Swithin's Lane, beneath the low-hanging moon with its juicy red center, another altar had been set up. It was the Cybele altar, the one that had been used in the castration ritual in 1956. Behind it stood Consivia, muttering prayers with her eyes closed. On either side of her were 2 nymphs, with the one stage left holding a violin. Above and to the left of the hedge, hanging from beneath the skybox, was a green plastic construction chute, about 12 inches in diameter. Normally used for removing debris from roofs and upper floors during construction projects, it had been hastily assembled by Rosenberg's servants and connected through the bottom of the skybox, as per my orders. On top of the skybox, in the center of its eastern edge, Rosenberg had them erect nothing less than the London stone itself. The stone had apparently come recently into his possession, being held in safekeeping for the City of London for a short term. It was supposed to be installed for public display the following week close to its original location on Cannon Street, right in front of the Walbrook building next door to both New Court and Rosenberg Plaza. About an hour earlier that evening, while things were being set up there on the terrace and Wetzel's body was being rendered into various products, Rosenberg had showed me the London stone, which he had hidden inside the column that was holding up the altar in the Mithraeum. He was showing it mainly to brag to me that he had it, and also to ask me if I thought it should be used as a ritual implement in the next portion of the ceremonies. I instantly saw in my mind's eye that it contained the same red light I had seen at the end of the bull entrails I had been forced to examine. I then heard that same mental voice tell me that the London stone held the answer to that other riddle which Rosenberg was demanding a solution for. "This rock is the egg that contains the keystone," it said. It seemed to me that my survival depended on giving Rosenberg the information he wanted to make his ritual successful from his perspective, whatever that meant. So on my instruction, acting on the inspiration that came to me from my psychic informant, Rosenberg had the ravens post the London stone on top of the very pylon that it was due to later be displayed on. I had him place it sitting on its side, taller than it was wide, unlike the way it was normally seen. Consivia ceased her private prayers and it became deathly quiet. The only sound was coming from the 4 live horses, outside the hedge, and beyond our field of vision. They could be heard clopping around and snorting, as the Lord High Admiral and 2 of his personal servants prepared them for God knows what. The Duke of Rothesay reached into his jacket underneath his robe and pulled out a cigarette wrapped in brown paper. He pushed up his mask part way and was about to light it with a Zippo. Rosenberg looked over at him and coughed. He threw it on the ground, put his mask down again disapprovingly, and slumped back into his chair. One of the nymphai started chanting in Latin verse once again, for just a few lines. The last was perfectly timed. It ended just as the bells of St. Paul's Cathedral struck out, ringing 11 times. Clouds began to cluster around the stars and the pregnant moon. A cold breeze stirred the air for just a moment, which had the effect of intensifying rather than dispersing the tension. Next, having been told by me that the proper archon to invoke next was Zeus, aka Jupiter, Consivia told the Duke of Rothesay to stand before the altar. "Will the royal lion on the purple throne come forth, please?" she said, holding out her right hand in a beckoning gesture. Then a man in a raven mask approached the Duke from his right with a metal bowl containing a piece of cooked meat. It smelled like the same stuff served to us at dinner that night. In another hand he held a metal goblet filled with wine. "Eat, dear prince, the sweet livers of the birds who guarded thy kingdom, and drink the ambrosial wine made from the blood of thine enemies." He cocked his head to the side, as if confused. Then he sighed and pushed his mask up a few inches, exposing his mouth. He grabbed the meat with his hand, quickly shoving it into his gob hole. I think it was just the bird's liver. pH. He gagged. A nymphess began playing a raucous, violent tune on the violin. I watched the Duke's mandibles masticating as he forced himself to eat it despite its awful taste. Then he took the wine and swallowed the whole mess in one gulp. His throat bulged as it went down. Sweat began to pour down his neck. Then he emitted a growl and broke into loud, heavy breathing as he handed back the dishes to the ravens. He stared at the priestess with his arms at his sides, balled into fists. She pushed his mask back down and then laid her left hand upon his head. She used her right to douse him with her aspergillum as she intoned the following incantation. Jupiter Feretrius, on this rooftop come to us. Use your thunderbolts to free the trophy of your destiny. Let your flaming sword come fly down from your throne in the sky. Then the stony egg shall yield to thy crown the true red shield, so that from thine enemy, whom we killed so valiantly, spoils of war you now shall reap. Precious jewel that's yours to keep. I didn't tell her that the rock was an egg, I thought. How did she know? Behind her, one of the 4 stars hovering next to the moon in the southern sky unmistakably began, I swear, to droop down and come closer. It grew so large that it no longer looked like a star, but rather a giant purple ball of light. This terrified me more than anything I had witnessed so far. All my life I had suffered from a recurring apocalyptic nightmare about seeing something just like this in the sky. I now realized that these were all premonitory dreams preparing me for this exact moment. Everybody else gazed up at the purple ball in wonder, even Rosenberg and Concivia. The Duke seemed almost like he had been electrocuted in place as he stood like a statue staring at it, with Concivia's hand still on his head. Baron Carrickfergus turned to Rosenberg and spoke, awkwardly. Oh yes, we saw something like this on the way over here this evening. Looked like there was a star, literally hovering over your plaza, Blake. They were almost like guiding lights, directing us to your doorstep. Shh, said Rosenberg, annoyed. Clouds covered the rest of the sky all around us, like being smothered by a pile of freshly sheared Gotland wool. They obscured everything but the purple sphere. Concivia handed the Duke a sistrum, as I had told her to. This was a rattle used in ancient Rome to make a noise like thunder in rituals. Jupiter Tonans, shake your thunderstick, she commanded the Duke. He obeyed. The sistrum rattled, held high above his head. Then we heard a clap of thunder, and a bolt of lightning shot down, not from the clouds, but directly from the purple orb. It hit the London stone on top of the skybox. The music stopped, and everybody gasped. The stone immediately disintegrated, and chunks rained down on us. One of them hit the violinist in the shoulder, nicking him. Another one clobbered Philippine in the back, bruising her badly and causing her to crumple back down to the ground with more sobs. But inside the oolite of the London stone was a hidden surprise, revealed when it disintegrated. A gigantic, shimmering, clear crystal. It looked to be well over a foot wide and almost a foot tall, which meant that it had been taking up the majority of the space within its casing. It landed with its tip pointing downward on the hedge right behind the altar, shining brightly, even in the dim light as it fell. From the side, it looked exactly like the Superman logo. From subsequent research, I have learned that this is actually the shape of the side profile of a diamond that has been cut in the style called the modern round brilliant. This is currently the most popular diamond cut designed to refract the maximum amount of light. What's odd is that, as you might have guessed from the name, this cut is a 20th century invention created by Marcel Tolkowski of Belgium in 1919. Yet this giant, brilliant cut diamond had clearly been hiding inside the London stone for hundreds of years at least. Furthermore, the number of facets and their distribution on this enormous gemstone in front of me turned out, as I soon discovered, to match the modern standard for a modern, round, brilliant cut. This consists of 33 on the crown and 25 on the pavilion, for a total of 58. It was designed this way to refract the maximum amount of light. Whatever the explanation for this, I knew it was obviously going to be something very unusual. Considering the strange things that had already happened, I was able to accept the presence of a modernly designed gemstone concealed inside of a supposedly ancient and natural rock as another example of the mutability of reality. After the diamond landed on top of the hedge, Consievia looked at the Duke and gestured at it as if to say, "Go ahead." In response, the Duke nodded to her and walked behind the altar. He reached up to take the shining gemstone from the top of the hedge. When he got his elderly, shaking hands upon it, he almost dropped it. He pulled his mask up above his eyebrows and gazed at it with awe. Its lustrous sparkles reflected in his eyes. "What is this?" he shouted to Rosenberg. "This has been inside the London stone the whole time? What's it made of? What's it for? My God, how much is it worth?" Rosenberg exhaled in exasperation. "It is worth more than your mother's entire kingdom, not just because of what it's made of, but also because of what it can do. And yes, the lords of the city have had it keistered on Cannon Street this entire time. It's part of the reason why the city has always been more powerful than the monarchy, though almost everyone has forgotten that by now. Even the Rothschilds, the younger ones, don't know about it. They don't even know what their family buckler symbolizes, or why this place is named Bucklersbury." "It looks like an actual diamond," the Duke gasped, still fawning over it. "But it's got to be 10 times bigger than any diamond I've ever seen." Rosenberg nodded, smiling. "If my projections are correct," he said, "it should be 15.5 inches across the girdle and 10.625 inches from the tip of its cullet to top of its crown. That's 4 times bigger than the largest uncut diamond ever seen," answered Rosenberg. "That was the Cullinan, which Edward VII had chopped up into over 100 pieces, now all owned by your mother. But I reckon she's never seen one cut quite like this or with the same properties." The Duke turned it around in his hands, allowing me a glimpse of the octagonal table at the top of the crown. I realized that the geometry on the top of the diamond matched what I had seen found in the design of the sunroof for Rosenberg's main building next door. "Yes, who would have done the cutting if this thing has been around for hundreds of years?" asked the Duke. "I mean, it's a brilliant cut, right? 58 facets? I thought this design was invented by that Tolkowski fellow in 1919. "In my experience," Rosenberg replied, "most modern scientific discoveries are either rediscoveries or reworkings of ancient alchemical techniques. Sometimes the inventors are ignorant of this, but sometimes they hide the truth too, just so they can file a patent. Take silicon on sapphire, for instance," the Duke interrupted, to Rosenberg's annoyance. "The workmanship is fantastic. I'll bet the fire it puts out is amazing. Shall I call up my man in Ghent to have it evaluated?" Rosenberg rolled his eyes. "You are speaking as a mortal," he said to the Duke. "A monarch in waiting, yes, and intoxicated with divine substance, but you still speak as a man. Let the Lord of Olympus take control of your mind and body completely. Let him experience the pleasures of being a man in the flesh, through your own mortal flesh. Then you will remember what it is you hold in your hands." As he said that last sentence, Rosenberg looked up at the purple orb, now even larger and lower in the sky than before. He stood up and gestured to the Duke's empty chair. "Return to your throne here," he instructed. "Soon the ravens will bring you something that Jove himself could not resist." The Duke sat down with the enormous jewel in his lap, pointing upward. The violin struck up again, and the priestess called Baron Carrickfergus to the altar. "Will the majestic sunrunner on the golden throne come forth, please?" He got up and walked to her with an arrogant swagger. She gave him the same preliminaries as the Duke had been given. He choked down his raven liver with disgust equal to that of his predecessor, but no greater comprehension of what he was eating. However, he really seemed to savor the intoxicating effects of the food and drink, which took hold immediately, with the characteristic sweating and heavy breathing. After draining his glass of blood ambrosia, he asked for a second, which he was given. When he had swallowed the last of it, he uttered a loud laugh of voluptuous exultation. Then he pushed down his mask again, pointed to the singing nymph in front of him beside the altar, and pointed to the ground in front of himself. The boy immediately ceased his song and complied with the unspoken order. Consievia intoned another stanza of her invocation to Jupiter. "Now's the time for little Jorge to come in here and join the soiree, playing precious Ganymede to the Prince of Pride and Greed." She held her right hand pointed out in front of her towards the opening in the hedge. In walked Miles, holding the hand of a little boy, white with blonde hair, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. He sucked his thumb and looked frightened, rightfully, by the spectacle in front of him. "Oh, no, 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 we can't do this," the Duke whispered to Rosenberg, audible enough for me to hear, but not the Baron, who stood oblivious, getting sucked by a nymphess at the altar and uttering obscenities at him. "I've gone to great lengths to never be alone with him so that this sort of thing never happens," the Duke continued, his voice trembling. But Rosenberg only beckoned Miles to come closer with the boy. "My dear Lion Prince, you know quite well that incest and pederasty is in your nature, not only because of your genetic predisposition, but because of the planetary archon that rules over you. He's the ruler of a dying eon who doesn't seem to have noticed that his throne is slipping out from underneath him. You do remember, don't you?" The Duke's body began to quiver as the boy came closer. To the right of us, over the sound of the Baron's ecstatic moaning and the ridiculous violin solo, the distant crash of thunder could be heard, and the clouds above grew even thicker. Rosenberg turned his attention to the light ball in the sky. "Wouldn't you love to sit in the throne of power again, the one which your own son supplanted you from, and be serviced by his son as a slave, turning his royal heir into your own royal cupbearer?" These last lines were directed more at the spirit of Zeus than the man who was becoming possessed by him. Rosenberg was reminding the Lord of Olympus how he had obtained victory over his father Kronos by pretending to be his cupbearer. This was a euphemism used in the ancient world for a catamite, a young male sex slave. Zeus used his intimate position in his father's royal court to obtain an opportunity to poison Kronos, a plot said to have been devised by the goddess Metis, whom Hammer Purgstall identified with Metis/Baphomet. As you no doubt remember, this caused Kronos to vomit up the children he had swallowed, which included all of Zeus' siblings, the gods of Olympus. They then defeated Kronos and the Titans, locked them up in Tartarus beneath the earth, and then ruled happily ever after. Or, at least, that's where the Greeks broke off their tale. Come to think of it, I said to myself mentally, the Romans did imply that Apollo was the firstborn son and successor to Zeus, or Jupiter as they called him. Apollo was the Olympian sun god, in contrast to Helios/Sol, who played the role of the sun during the golden age of Kronos/Saturn and the Titans. Most writers just chose to say that Helios/Sol became syncretized with Apollo in later years. But what if they were really separate characters? I wondered. What if Apollo supplanted Helios as the new sun, and the former sun he overthrew was locked up in Tartarus with the rest of the Titans? Maybe that's the meaning of the symbol of the black sun that's in the center of the earth. Then I thought about the fact that in the late Roman Empire, Mithraism finally gained support from the emperors by syncretizing Mithras with Sol Invictus, thus making a god already identified with Saturn/Kronos a solar figure as well. And alchemists have consistently identified Saturn with the black sun, I thought. In the present eon, which is the one that supplanted the rule of Zeus from Olympus, the sun is the undisputed ruler of the current order. But Zeus used to play that role somehow, and before him, Kronos did it. But during that time, Helios was a separate entity, playing a different role than he does now. The sun was not, back then, the central power. Or rather, someone else was playing the role of the sun. Now, the things that Rosenberg said to the Duke of Rothesay made sense to me. The Duke's body was being used to draw down Zeus/Jupiter into mortal incarnation. The body of Baron Carrickfergus was being used to draw down the spirit of the new sun, his successor. Zeus was defeated by the new sun god, I thought to myself. I wonder when that happened exactly. The era of the worship of Jupiter gave way at the end of the empire to Apollo, Sol Invictus, Mithras, and of course, to Jesus. And there it was. The answer to my question of when the eon of Zeus/Jupiter had given way to that of the present sun was obvious. Year 1 Anno Domini. The transition marked by the collapse of Rome and the descent of the West into long-term intellectual darkness may not have been clear to everyone back then, I thought, but later it became connected with the advent of Jesus Christ, and it came to pass that the reckoning of time was started over from that point. So fate devised an appropriate way of marking the passage from the eon of one sun to that of the next. All of this came to me as I sat there in the wheelchair at the rooftop terrace of Newcourt, prompted by the comments that Rosenberg was making to the Duke of Rothesay. Zeus is being enticed into the Duke's body, I realized, with the promise of having Apollo, his supplanter, serve in the humiliating position of cupbearer, as Zeus had once done in the effort to take the throne from his father. Also, pederasty with very young boys was a known proclivity of Zeus, going back to his kidnapping of Ganymede to serve as his own cupbearer. My attention snapped back to the scene in front of me. Little St. George was being guided by Miles to stand between the legs of the Duke, who handed the diamond over to Rosenberg. He looked at the man in the lion mask with fear, clearly not recognizing that it was his own grandfather. Then Miles tapped the boy's shoulder, and he sank to his knees, obviously trained for the job ahead of time. The Duke handed the red crystal in his lap to Rosenberg, who then handed it to a trusted raven. I looked away, up at the sky, just in time to see something like a golden chain appearing as thick as a tree trunk emerged from the purple orb. It dangled down somewhere to the south, seemingly close to our location. The bottom of the chain dropped down below my line of sight. The golden chain of the Zeus, I thought to myself. In Homer's Iliad, Zeus says to the other gods, "If you tied a chain of gold to the sky, and all of you, gods and goddesses, took hold, you could not drag Zeus the High Counselor to earth with all your efforts. But if I determined to pull with a will, I could haul up land and sea, then loop the chain round a peak of Olympus and leave them dangling in space. By that much am I greater than gods and men." Here I was looking at such a golden chain, quite literally, with spiga-style links, forged from ovals twisted to look like grains of wheat. It dropped down from the purple sphere like Rapunzel's hair, hanging there for a moment between the sky and the earth. Then it slithered down and disappeared from view, like it had been snipped from above. For about a minute, I heard the zapping sounds of electricity arching, and everybody's hair bristled. Then something that looked just like the purple orb in the sky, but about 5 inches in width, shot through the construction chute and hit the Duke on the top of his head. There it was absorbed, causing a ripple down the man's spine. He convulsed, ripped his robe open, and then arched his pelvis upward towards the boy's head, which was already dutifully going down to its task. Now it seemed what gods and men before had not been able to achieve with force for thousands of years. A wealthy businessman in London had done merely by offering the body of a powerful prince as the vessel through which to experience the carnal pleasures of pederasty. Watching it happen before my very eyes led me to a realization about a line from my favorite Welsh poet Robert Graves' book, The White Goddess. This is what he meant when he said the priests of ancient Rome performed the rites of Eliseo to seduce the gods of captured nations into serving the empire instead. As the Duke gave in to his proclivities and gasped with pleasure, possessed by debaucherous divinity, Rosenberg chuckled and encouraged him. "That's it, King Carlos. Let Jorge treat you right." "What about the boy's father?" The Duke gasped in a whisper, almost too overwhelmed with delectation to speak. "Ignore him," said Rosenberg. "He's ignoring you." As if to create a barrier to blind the Baron to his father's abuse of his son, Concivia stepped out in between the altar and the thrones. She then beckoned the ravens and men with leather veils, who gathered around the thrones in the space beside her, fully covering the Duke's actions from the Baron's view. She sang another stanza to the incarnation of Jupiter before her. "'Tis so divine to rape your meat. The taste of pain is good to eat, and bliss sublime is all the more, when child of thy loins doth play the whore." The Duke moaned louder, and Rosenberg stepped in quickly, pulling the boy's head away. "Easy there," he said. "Hold your horses. You've got a job to do here, don't forget. This is just a warm-up exercise." Then he addressed Concivia. "Invoke the sun, and have the barber surgeons bring the girl." The priestess gestured towards 2 of the men in leather veils, both with waxing moon symbols. They nodded, then left the hedge to go fetch her. Concivia returned to her place behind the altar and held her arms aloft. "Sol Invictus, join your bride, shining queen who pulls the tide. Fructify the holy womb, rape the goddess in her tomb." At that moment, quite suddenly, the moon peeked out through the clouds, along with one of the other stars, which now grew until it was the very same size as the moon. It was yellow like the sun, but it did not light up the sky as the sun does during the day. They stood next to each other, with the purple orb, slightly smaller, sitting beneath them, and the other, smaller stars nearby. Nobody else seemed to notice but me, Chesterfield, and Rosenberg. All the others were too entranced by the sex acts, which they no doubt wished to join in on. "And what the hell is that?" Chesterfield whispered to me. "The New Jerusalem? Is this the end of the world?" It was the first thing he'd said to me since he returned from selling out his country and helping Rosenberg cover up the Rothschilds' child sex slave ring, which they had no doubt used to compromise virtually everyone with any power in the entire kingdom. I knew that his life had been threatened, and I knew I was guilty of things just as bad, but that didn't mean I'd forgiven him. "The New Jerusalem is a cube," I replied. "This is the sun coming out at night." "But William Blake said that London was Jerusalem," Chesterfield noted, seemingly irrelevantly, or so it seemed at the time. "Shut up!" the Duke snapped. "I was about to come." "Not yet," said Rosenberg, and he stood up quickly to help block the Duke's view of the entrance to the hedge. The Duke returned to his preoccupation. Poor Philippine, who could barely walk now, was brought in on a gurney by the barber surgeons, which, by now I had gathered, was the term for the men with the waxing moon symbols on their veils, the butchers being those with the waning moon on their veils. They dumped her, awake again now and crying, on the pavement between the horse and human blockade protecting the pederast prince on his purple throne. Naked on top of a tall building in the middle of the night, Philippine was shivering severely. She rolled over on her stomach and emitted a high-pitched squeal. At the sound of her cry, Baron Carrickfergus turned around sharply, separating from the boy as he did so. When he laid eyes upon the girl, I swear, I saw them flash with a golden glow for a brief second, visible through the holes of his sun mask. Then the yellow orb poured out a yellow-orange stream of fluid. It seemed to fall close by, to the south of us, just where the golden chain had dropped down. It honestly looked like the sun-like object taking a piss. A few moments later, a miniature version of it was emerging from the construction chute about the size of a basketball. The mini-sun came and hovered over the Baron's head, forming an angelic halo behind him. He looked up at it lovingly and smiled. Then it entered him, lighting up his body like a yellow glow stick as it traveled down his spine. Fully possessed now, the Baron grabbed his falling trousers with his left hand, raised his right hand to the sky, and laughed excitedly. "Ah, yes, finally, a female in this castle of faggotry." He let his pants fall to the ground and then stepped out of them, along with his shoes. Concivia placed a horsewhip in his hand. "She's got the face of a horse, though," he said, without looking up at his hand. "Then get her inside the brazen horse where you can't see her face and have a go at her backside," said Concivia. "That's what we're all here to witness." The Baron looked left at the crowd that had gathered near him, unaware of the sight they were blocking him from, and acknowledged them with a salute. Then he looked at his hand and saw what the priestess had given him. "All right then, thanks," he said. He brought down his whip upon the girl's exposed buttocks, shouting "Gee!" and "Ha!" at her with repeated blows to get her to move in the direction he wanted. He forced her to climb inside the horse's velvet-lined interior, with her rump lined up to the hole in the back. This opening also wrapped around the side partway, providing a cross-section for the audience to view of her pelvis and legs inside the device. The Baron walked up behind her and up the three-step mounting block that had been placed there for him. He pulled his mask up to his forehead for a moment and spat on his hand for lubrication. But then Concivia offered him an open can of Lyle's golden syrup. "Don't be vulgar," she admonished. "This is a holy rite, not a porn movie." He looked at her for a moment, probably finding the same irony in her comment that I did. "Out of the strong shall come forth sweetness," she said, in all seriousness. That was a paraphrase of the company's slogan on the syrup can, which itself is a quote from Judges chapter 14, verse 14, something about bees making honey in the carcass of a lion. The Baron took a handful of the syrup, which was somehow less vulgar than spit for sodomizing 12-year-old girls with, then smeared it on himself, as well as the girls behind. The sun-like object above then began pulsating, its brightness flickering up and down to different levels at the pace of an excited heartbeat. "Ooh, no," Philippine droned dreadfully. Then she let out another ear-piercing shriek as the Baron penetrated her anus. Above, the sky darkened as the moon and the golden orb, still pulsating, merged together halfway, forming a Vesica Pisces shape with a sickly yellow oval in the center. Inside of this oval was that round red splotch that the moon had acquired, now tinted to appear orange. Just then, the Duke used his shoe to kick Rosenberg, still standing in front of him, lightly in the back of the leg. Rosenberg turned around and looked at him. "What?" "I can't hold out much longer," said the Duke. "I'm ready to blow." The Baron had fallen backwards a step on the horse mount, probably drunk from ambrosial blood wine and, of course, archontic possession. He caught himself on the second step and didn't fall all the way down, but he had to reinsert himself into his victim. Then he climaxed suddenly with a shout. However, halfway through shooting his load, he pulled out, then went back in quickly to deliver the rest of it. "Whoops! Wrong hole there," he said, and laughed, slapping her behind. Then he glanced over to his left and scanned the crowd, looking for the Duke. "Daddy, she's all yours," he hollered. Just in time, Rosenberg pulled little St. George away from his task and into the shadows in the corner of the hedge behind us. Then I saw him hand the boy off to Miles. Meanwhile, Concivia grabbed the Duke and shoved him over to the brazen horse, forcing the crowd to part. There was no time for more lubrication. The Duke put his penis in the young lady's now widened anus, just in time to deliver the seed. But as his thrusts subsided, his relief turned to shock. A hand grabbed him from behind on the left shoulder and pulled him partway out of what he was stuck in. Another hand brought the blade of a ceremonial harp down swiftly on the man's genitals, severing them in one clean blow. It was the Baron. Rosenberg had handed him the weapon, then pulled the Duke backwards so he could make the cut. The Duke screamed and fell backwards, blood pouring out of his crotch, which he covered as he rolled over in pain, hollering horribly. "Ah, oh." Then Baron put the harp on the altar and picked up his horsewhip again, which he had temporarily placed there. Concivia stepped forth and shoved the cut penis and balls, which were still sticking out of Philippine's rectum, all the way in. The girl shrieked again, then sobbed some more. "That will give your baby some extra nutrition tonight," said the priestess, as she smiled psychotically in her clown makeup. The Baron stood over the Duke, horsewhip in hand, as his victim continued to wail. He landed a blow on the man's face, causing him to try to roll further away. Then he started shouting at the Duke and pointing at St. George, who was still cowering in the corner of the hedge, hugging Miles' leg and burying his face. "So you use my son to get your dick hard because you can't get it up for a girl anymore? Because you're a faggot," he whipped him again. "Because you want to mess up his head the same way you and Grandpa messed me up? Then you come and fuck my wife too." Another blow. The Duke, barely able to speak, managed to choke out an objection to the Baron's delusional remark, brought on, no doubt, by the possession. "That is not your wife," he said. "That is a whore and a Jewess. Your wife is back at the palace waiting for you." The Baron hit him again. "Do not talk about my wife like that," he shouted. "She's not a Jewess," Rosenberg said, intervening. He took away the horsewhip, which the Baron reluctantly allowed, and stared down at the Duke. "You both may think she looks like a horse, but you have only your own genes to blame, not the Rothschilds." "What do you mean?" Both the Duke and the Baron asked in unison. "Crispin was the youngest son of the princess," said Rosenberg. "Your wife, the one you let your mother kill, Duke of Rothesay, just as Oenomaus, the son of Ares, disposed of his daughter's suitors with a faulty chariot wheel that sent 12 of them to their deaths." "That's just a conspiracy theory," said the Baron. "And she wasn't pregnant with that Arab's baby." "No, but she was pregnant with your father's baby," Rosenberg replied. "They had recently engaged in an intimate encounter, despite their divorce." "Isn't that right, Duke of Rothesay?" "How do you know this?" the Duke gasped, losing blood rapidly. "Because the barber surgeons were hired to cut up the body on your mother's orders, and to deliver the heart to you on your orders. But they were already working for me as well, and when they told me about what they would be doing with the princess, I took the liberty of having the womb excised for myself. Then I brought it to fruition with the power of my alchemy." The Baron's head hung low as he took it all in. He was a fine boy, really, intelligent and beautiful to behold. I let the Martinez adopt him, thinking that he would be well cared for, but they just wanted to use his existence as leverage against the crown. They neglected his moral instruction. The influence of being raised by bankers turned him into a greedy, weak pantywaist, fit only for fucking. I thank you for helping me take him out of the picture. I don't think I could have done it otherwise. I loved him like a son, in my own way. "Is it true?" the Baron asked his father, tears streaming out from under his sun mask. He had picked up the harp again and stood holding it above his head. The Duke took his own mask off and managed to get on his knees, crawling to the Baron's feet, where he put his face. "Is it true that you killed my mother?" the Baron continued, "and that Crispin was my brother?" The Duke looked up, pleading in his eyes, which now appeared human. "Again. I didn't know he was your brother, and killing your mother was Regina's idea. There was nothing I could do to stop it, but I loved her. That's why I kept the heart." "I'm sorry, son." The Baron looked up at the sky, and so did I. The sun-like object was separated from the moon again, and no longer pulsating. The purple orb was drooping down below them, while 2 other stars hovered nearby. What's more, now there were 2 dark red circles in the center of the moon, side by side, one darker and larger than the other, both bigger than the one we had seen before. As we watched, the purple orb dropped out of the southern sky, straight down, as though into the river, causing all, even me, to gasp, even though I was kind of expecting it. A sharp clanging sound brought my eyes back down to the scene before me. The Baron had dropped his harp and turned away from his father, exhaling a sigh of exhaustion and grief. "I forgive you," he said, and walked out of the hedge. The Duke's face hit the pavement. He was dead. Rosenberg rolled the body over with his left shoe, and then used his face to wipe off some horse dung that was stuck to the bottom of his right shoe. Having now pulled his face away from Miles' leg, poor little St. George screamed as he finally recognized the man who had been wearing the lion mask. "Grandpa." Miles held him tight to prevent him from running over to his grandfather's emasculated and disgraced body. A pair of ravens walked up briskly and covered him with the purple standard. Then 2 butchers carried the body away on a pram like the others. A lion, whom I thought to be Leopold, came forward with an antique box that I recognized, the Mette coffer. He picked up the diamond from the black throne, wrapped it in white linen, and placed it inside of the box. Then he followed the ravens out of the hedge. Seized with ferocity upon hearing St. George's pitiful wailing, Rosenberg marched over to grab the boy by the arm. Miles actually tried to hold on to him for a moment before ultimately letting go. It was the first sign of resistance to either of his bosses that I had seen from him so far. Rosenberg jerked George over to the side of the brazen horse. Philippine, bleeding profusely from her now gaping rectum, was conscious still, but seemed to be near death. I was sure that the repeated anal rapes had already damaged her internal organs, and I knew that she would not last long without medical attention. But her suffering thus far was nothing like what she was about to endure. Rosenberg told the boy to bow down before him. The child looked up, confused, like he didn't understand the words. Tears were still pouring down his puffy red face as his protruding lower lip quivered. "Kneel!" Rosenberg shouted at him. St. George looked at Miles helplessly. Rosenberg looked at him too. "Make him obey," he yelled. Miles reluctantly took out his gun and motioned for the boy to get down on his knees. I had thought that Rosenberg just wanted oral sex, which he did. But first, he had another demand. "Do you promise to serve me as your master for the rest of your days, no matter what fate shall befall you?" he asked. "Okay," the boy said between sobs. Of course, he didn't know what was happening or what had just been said, but he knew how to do what he was asked to do next. As this august personage and child of perfect innocence began his second round of forced fellatio in a 20-minute period, 2 nymphi and 2 lions circumambulated both Rosenberg and Consivia, who stood behind the altar and aligned with Rosenberg on his left. They now locked eyes with each other while the nymphi sprayed them with holy water, and the lions used their censers to fumigate them. The violin began playing again, but just for a few bars. Rosenberg took his Phrygian cap off, and Consivia, about 3 inches taller than him, reached out to put her hand on his head. Thus began another invocation. Kronos, Saturnus, Sotomo, Satanus, cutter of the crooked phallus. Stercutus, Sator, Satre, Dispater, killer of the Cosma crater. Piercer of the deathly womb, raider of the sacred tomb, plow the fields and work the wheels, crash the pillars, seal the steel. Consivia reached out to Rosenberg with her right hand, and he bent over to grasp it. The hand hung there between them for a minute as the invocation continued. "Come back to thy bride Jerusalem, the blood-sucking lamb, the Ericapium. Come back and join your true lover again. Come back and join with your mother again. Join with your daughter and join with your wife. Let us pierce the sky with the tip of your knife." Suddenly, a laser-like indigo ray of light came down from the sky with no obvious source, dropping down close by to the south of us, just like the emissions from the light orbs. Then a black sphere came out from the same place in the sky and traveled down the beam to the bottom, beyond my field of view. About 2 minutes later, that black sphere, now shrunken to the size of a soccer ball, flew out of the construction chute and onto the top of Rosenberg's head, which was exposed and ready to receive it. At first, the only sign that the spirit had taken hold of Rosenberg was that he became more violent now with little St. George. He began choking him with his penis and grunting obscenities over the child's gagging, muffled screams. The jangle of chains caused me to look away from this abhorrent abomination. 4 ravens walked in with 3 metal poles, some sandbags, and a pair of iron chains. They set them up swiftly in front of the altar, so that one beam was held up crossways by the other 2, which had bases at the bottom and were about 9 feet high. The bases were supported by the sandbags. The chains were hung from the crossbeam, each with a shackle at the end. Consivia stepped forward from the altar, taking off her court hat, and a shoulder-length braid of powdery gray hair emerged, falling down the back of her neck. A raven then brought her a bowl of meat and a cup of the blood wine, which she consumed quickly without visible reaction. She closed her eyes briefly and inhaled sharply. When she opened her eyes again, a moment later, they were glowing with a piercing silvery light. Her new eyes scanned the crowd intimidatingly. She put her hands in the air, with her shepherd's crook held high in her left hand, and called out forcefully with a commanding voice, quieting all who were present in an instant. "Silence! Be still! I command you to listen, for I am the hen and the egg in the chicken. It is me, thy lady of perpetual sprouting, Sophia Subactrix, denying and doubting, Opa Consivia, Madonna Lactans, omnipotent Mete, with the world in my hands, Spica Virginis and Magna Mater co-murderess of the Cosma Crater." The line where she identified herself as Opa Consivia caused me to see the priestess in a new light, for it finally dawned on me where I had seen the Latin title Consivia before. It was from none other than my published translation of Mysterium Baphometis Revelatum, where Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall wrote that he found a, quote, genuflecting idol, on the back of which were engraved words in Arabic letters that, transliterated and translated, spelled out, "She is exalted, Mete Consivia." I and our race were 7. My translator, I now recalled, had put in brackets that Consivia meant she who plants. It occurred to me that it was an appropriate name for Reverend Springhole, whose persona was clearly meant to invoke the role of the wife of Kronos/Saturn the sower. But it confused me. If Mete was Metis, I mused, as Hammer-Purgstall had suggested, that means she was the wife of Zeus, not Kronos. That was Rhea, the one the Romans called Ops. But they say that the mother of Zeus plotted against her husband to save her son, just as Gaia had done to save Kronos from Oranos. Metis schemed with Zeus to poison his father before she married him and got eaten by him. And some say that Kronos actually married his mother, that Gaia and Rhea were the same. A chill went through me as all of these errant pieces snapped into place to form a picture in my mind. I wonder if Metis and Rhea could be the same too. I wonder if it's the same goddess in every story, always playing the same roles with her husband and her children in each generation. The Greeks compounded Rhea with Cybele, making Cybele the mother of Zeus. But Cybele was also the mother of Attis, and look how she treated him. I was abruptly snapped out of this contemplation as Reverend Consivia Springhole stopped humming and began stomping her right foot to an angry beat, which the drummer boy accompanied in perfect sync. "I am the stone of the wisdom of Mete. I baptize my own with the blood from my teat. I bring down the stars from the darkness of heaven, and cut off the heads of the 1 and the 7. The 9 are within me, as well as the 8. For I am the mother of love and of hate. With Stercutus, my lord, I shall consummate, destroy all but death, and then regenerate." A sweeping gust of wind came in from the southeast, blowing the robes around. Rosenberg pushed George away from him, thank God, and the boy ran off to a safer space near the hedge. Then came a dramatic drum roll from the drummer boy, off in the shadows behind me. I was unprepared for what came next. The ravens untied and pulled off her garments. This revealed the predictably bony body of an elderly Caucasian woman, with wrinkled, blanched skin covered in liver spots. But there were two unique features. For one thing, the breasts looked like a couple of halved grapefruits sagging down at the bottom of previously overstretched skin sacs. They were not real, and they had been implanted decades ago. For another thing, the pubic region was completely covered with something like a freestanding athletic support cup, but with less bulge. This was removed, revealing that there was no vagina, but rather a white plastic stoma keeping a small hole open about a finger's width and sticking out about 1/4 of an inch. This too was removed, so that now just the hole was showing. That explains how Rosenberg could be partnered with a female even though he hates females, I realized, because this is not a naturally born female. The ravens picked up Conchivia and put the shackles on her legs. They set her dangling upside down from the crossbeam. I could see that the bowl was ancient, and it was covered in grotesque reliefs of semi-human figures contorting in mass congress. As these things were being assembled, Conchivia looked on with the most obscene harlequinesque grin on her face, and her eyes continued to shine preternaturally as she seethed with enjoyment. This could be heard quite clearly when the music abruptly stopped. All was silent but her breathing, and the wind, now gentle but steady. Rosenberg straightened up, put his hat back on, dipped his hand in a can of Lyle's golden syrup that was offered to him by a raven, and slavered it on his wetted, palpitating member. Then he used the first 3 fingers on his left hand to scoop up another dollop of lube, which he held in the monopantea gesture of blessing towards the priestess, like a sacred offering. Another raven brought the 3-step horse mount over and placed it behind her. Rosenberg ascended with a hop, putting his pelvis up within reach of Conchivia's backside. He wrapped each of his arms around one of her legs, and 2 ravens raised her up so that her torso, neck, and head were now horizontal. As Rosenberg inserted his syrup-laden finger into her urethra hole, she inhaled sharply, then exhaled with a lilting, blissful sigh. Then he held the first 3 fingers on his right side out to his left, and a raven took the cue, giving him more Lyle's syrup. Rosenberg used it to lubricate Conchivia's ancient anus, stretched out and grotesquely protruding due to decades of abuse. This caused her to sigh again. These sighs were the only hint of Conchivia's sexuality that we had so far seen. Throughout the orgies until that point, she had been the only chaste participant. But now, possessed by what appeared to be the true consort of Saturn, she gave herself to the host of that spirit with gusto. Rosenberg's entrance into her rear caused the most peculiar ululation to come from Conchivia's throat. As they copulated, he continued to stretch out her urethra hole until he was able to insert 2 fingers, thrusting them in and out vigorously, to her intense enjoyment. In between moans, they both chanted lines from William Blake's Jerusalem, clipped and assembled out of context. The stars in their courses fought, the sun, moon, heaven, earth, contending for Albion and for Jerusalem, his emanation, a brooder of an evil day, and a sun rising in blood, a sun of blood-red wrath surrounding heaven on all sides around, glorious, incomprehensible by mortal man, and each chariot was sexual twofold. The sound of them both droning these lines in absolute perfect unison while joined in flesh so bizarrely, looking and sounding like a single monstrous being, was quite chilling. Then suddenly, Rosenberg rammed his rod further in, with more violence, growling like a ferocious bear. "Ha! Oh! Paternoster! Paternoster! Oh! Ah!" Conchivia screamed. Just like the others before him, and as I suspected he would, Rosenberg pulled out from her before ejaculation and shoved himself into the back of his adopted daughter, who barely reacted to the entrance this time. She was still breathing, though, I noted. I also saw that, above us, the moon had been half-clipsed by darkness. As the seaman poured in and his pelvis quaked, he uttered a moaning, gasping mantra in Latin, with his eyes closed and his hands clenching the back of the brazen horse. Dixit e spiritus sanctus superveniet, inte dixit e spiritus sanctus superveniet, inte concepere in anno est. Concepere in anno est. Concepere in anno est. Conchivia now joined in as well, now hanging straight upside down from the chains again. As she chanted with her pupils rolled up into her eyelids, Lyle's golden syrup dribbled from her buttocks down onto the ground. Dicit a Spiritus Sanctus superveniet in te dixit a Spiritus Sanctus superveniet in te concepere in anno est. Concepere in anno est. The first two lines I now, with subsequent research, know to mean, "The Spirit of God shall come upon you," a quote from the Archangel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary found in Luke chapter 1, verse 35. This had been joined with a Latin phrase meaning, "conceive in the anus." I glanced up briefly at the moon and noted that it was full again, unobstructed from view, and that the larger red spot in the center was actively growing bigger before my eyes. Just as the last drop of Consivia's semen was squirted from the turkey baster, a nymphus tooted 6 annunciatory notes on his trumpet, and the clopping of horse hooves could be heard. I looked and saw the Lord High Admiral leading in one of the horses through the entrance to the hedge. Then I looked back at Philippine. A raven was daubing her with yet another sticky substance onto her back end at both openings. For a moment I thought it might be the flying ointment that I had ordered, prompted by my unseen informant, which was supposed to be made from Wetzel's fat. But then I saw the stallion rear up and break away from his master. The Lord High Admiral let go of the reins, then started clapping his hands with excitement as he watched what happened next. Horse hormones, I thought to myself. Oh God. I looked away. Philippine shrieked repeatedly for a few seconds. Then she didn't make any more sounds. I looked down at my side and my eyes met Chesterfield's. He looked 10 years older than he had when I met him, and in those eyes I saw that a part of his soul had died that night. Then his eyes dropped down, his mouth parted, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. He put his deformed hand on top of mine and squeezed it. That horse was led away, and 3 more were brought forth in succession, each with a trumpet blast. I kept my eyes in the other direction. I only saw the horses arriving and departing. When the last horse left the hedge, the nymphus blew his trumpet once more, and then we heard the bells of St. Paul's Cathedral chiming 12 times. As the chimes rang out, Consivia softly sang a song made from a set of lines I recognized from Fulcanelli's alchemical treatise, The Mystery of the Cathedrals. At midnight, a Virgin Mother brings forth this shining star. At this miraculous moment, we call God our brother. I looked up at the sky. The clouds around us were dissipating rapidly. Now it could be seen that there was only one small light still hovering next to the moon, which had gone mostly dark and was no longer white at all. There were now 3 red spots in the center, one bigger than the others, and they actually seemed to be glowing. It was as if this light, not a reflection of light from the sun, was spreading faintly from there to the outer edges of the lunar disk. The rest of the moon was cast in a gradient, fading from old mauve to brownish red, and then to black. I know they call a lunar eclipse a blood moon, because it turns the moon red, I thought. But there isn't supposed to be an eclipse tonight, it's just the night before the full moon. And there aren't supposed to be red lights glowing from inside of it. I also noticed another thing. The appearance of the craters on its face seemed to be upside down from the way I remembered them being. "Where's that thing that looks like a sun?" Chesterfield asked. As he said that, we both saw it moving northeast across the sky. The whole congregation began running out of the hedge, trying to follow it. Chesterfield jumped to his feet and ran behind them, pushing my wheelchair along the way. When got out of the hedges, we turned, like the others, towards the northeast and looked across the terrace to the yellow orb in the sky, which had come to a halt. There was the Lord High Admiral hitching the last of the 4 horses up to his black chariot. The other 3 had already been hitched. They looked quite satisfied. Their undersides were covered with blood. I noticed that the chariot had been outfitted with a sharp scythe sticking out of each side. Baron Carrickfergus was standing there solemnly before the horses with his sun mask in his hand beside him, and his head dropped down. Little St. George was inside the chariot car on the right side, leaning against the side and staring at the air in front of him, traumatized into catatonia. Suddenly, out of the hedge we had used for the ritual came a procession, led by the lions with their torches and censers. Next came the ravens, the first of them carrying the silver casket from the Mithraeum, swinging on a chain. This was the vessel that had been used in the Easter Sunday film to hold the hallucinogenic ointment that lubricated the Bossy of Billingsgate prior to the rape. Undoubtedly, it now held the flying ointment made from Wetzel's fat. The ravens were then followed by the nymphi, the butchers, the barber surgeons, and finally Rosenberg. They all marched solemnly to the chariot, and then gathered behind it. Chesterfield walked closer, slowly, pushing me along, so that we could get a clearer view. The lead raven with the casket anointed the chariot wheels, the back of the car, and each hoof of the horses with the foul salve. Meanwhile, Rosenberg walked up to Baron Carrickfergus and whispered something to him. The man raised his head and seemed to take whatever he heard into consideration. From the hedge, Conchivia had emerged, with her vestments on once again, and looking no worse for the wear. She spryly strode up and stood next to her partner, the Pater. The Baron took a long, mournful look at his son, who didn't look back. Then he put his sun mask back on and bent down on one knee in front of Rosenberg, like one about to be knighted. However, this wasn't good enough. Rosenberg wanted a much greater sign of submission. "Not quite," he shouted to the man on the ground in front of him. "Genuflect to me in toto, Heliodromus." The violinist played 8 long, droning, sonorous notes. Conchivia raised her shepherd's crook and chanted, "Et procedens adoravit eum. Et procedens adoravit eum." That is, and they worshipped him. "Give me the full obeisance," Rosenberg ordered. Slowly, the Baron got down on both knees and then prostrated himself completely. His head was on the ground, and his rear end was in the air. Then Conchivia turned to the congregation with her arms spread out wide before her and sang, "Omne genuflectatur caelestium, terrestrium et infernorum." That is, every knee shall bend, in heaven, on earth, and in hell. Everyone else got down on their knees also, genuflecting in the same fashion. Seeing this, even Chesterfield did it too. I was hoping I would get out of this requirement for being in a wheelchair with broken legs. It didn't matter. Rosenberg didn't even look our way. He was also droning in Latin, his hands stretched out to the sky in a grabbing gesture, savoring the moment. 2 butchers brought out Philippine's bruised and besmirched body. She was motionless. I did not see if she was breathing, because she was now covered in the folds of a black robe. They lowered it to the ground and arranged it in the same genuflecting position as the others, not unlike the position she took inside of the brazen horse as she was raped repeatedly. "Somnium quasi solem et lunam et stellas adorare me, sed non est somnium somnium." That is, I dreamt that the sun and the moon and the stars bowed down to me, but it was not a dream. In unison, all of the nymphi began to hum ominously. The drummer boy gave a drum roll. The lion, Leopold, I think, walked out holding a staff before him. It was one I had seen before, the one with the mummified human penis on the end of it. The bossy of Billingsgate. 2 ravens came and lifted up the back of the Baron's robe, then pulled down his trousers. Another greased both the Baron's backside and the bossy quite liberally with Lyle syrup. Rosenberg took the bossy from Leopold and aimed it at his target with relish. As the shaft was inserted violently, repeatedly, Baron Carrickfergus pushed his mask up over his head and tore at his hair. He grunted in pain, but he didn't scream or cry. He kept that dignity. Yet when Rosenberg finally stepped back, satisfied with the humiliation, the Baron raised his head up a bit, displaying a grimace with his open mouth formed into an O shape, a tunnel of darkness leading to an empty void. There was a look of total shock at the outrage against His Majesty. I recognized the look on his face. For a moment I couldn't place it. Then I remembered the golden flag behind the thrones in the hedge. The countenance of the inverted sun, depicted there, had borne the exact same expression. Behind him, I noticed the sun-like object had dipped lower in the sky, as if it too were lowering itself in submission to the incarnation of Saturn. A bit to the south of that, the moon had dipped lower as well. Then I heard a retching sound, and a ghastly smell. A horrid mix of feces and vomit pervaded the air. I looked down and saw that Baron Carrickfergus was emptying the contents of his stomach, and, judging from the odor, his intestines as well, onto the ground in front of him. Fecal vomiting? I thought to myself. Caused by rupture of the intestines and/or plugging of the anus at the time of an attempted bowel movement? I wonder if sodomy was the poison that Zeus administered to Kronos as his cupbearer. "You may rise," said Rosenberg. "All rise," said Conchivia. Everybody in the congregation stood up again. After a few seconds, Baron Carrickfergus regained his composure, replaced his mask, and stood up also. As he did so, the sun-like object behind him rose up in the sky, again to its previous position, before the Baron had prostrated himself. When two ravens picked up Philippine and tied her with ropes onto the back of one of the horses, the moon moved closer to the sun-like object and somewhat behind it. Baron Carrickfergus didn't bother to fasten up his pants. He just grabbed his belt and let his disheveled robe fall down over him haphazardly as he waddled to the car of the chariot. When he had climbed in, Rosenberg had the nerve to approach him for a handshake. "Thank you for living up to your part of the bargain," he said. The Baron shook his hand, letting go of his pants, which fell to his feet. Consivia handed him the horsewhip again, this time for actually whipping horses. Then he took the reins. Little St. George grabbed onto him, frightened, as the horses took off trotting. I knew what the bargain was. He had taken the rape from the bossy of Billingsgate so that his son wouldn't have to endure it. That's what he had been threatened with, so it wasn't a bargain at all, just like all of Rosenberg's deals. The Baron drove the horses in a circuit around the perimeter of the terrace 3 times, each time whipping them once to get them to speed up. As they went around, Rosenberg and Consivia chanted the Sator Square repeatedly in unison. Sator, Aripo, Tenet, Opera, Rodas, Sator, Aripo, Tenet, Opera, Rodas, Sator, Aripo, Tenet, Opera, Rodas. As he approached the southeast side on the 3rd Circuit, he drove closer to the wall. Everyone got out of the way, except the Lord High Admiral, who just stood there, right where they are headed, senile and oblivious, rocking back and forth on a cane. The Baron deliberately drove the horses right at him. When they got within a few feet of him, the Baron lifted the reins up a bit, but the horses did not slow down. Instead, they began, I swear, to lift up off the ground. The flying ointment was doing its magic. It was the same substance, made from human fat, that witches once used to make their broomsticks fly to the mountaintops for secret nighttime sabbats with the devil. Now, right before our very eyes, right there on that cursed high-rise rooftop terrace crowning the empire of a dynasty of financial sorcerers, the ointment caused 4 horses, a man, a boy, and a chariot to fly up into the sky with no other means of suspension or propulsion. As they began their liftoff, the horses knocked down and trampled the Lord High Admiral under their feet. He tried to look up from the ground, just in time for his head to be chopped off by one of the scythes, sending it scuttling across the pavement. Then the horses and the chariot soared up over the rooftop railing, like Santa and his reindeer, over St. Swithin's Lane. Most remarkably, the sun-like object along the sky as well, mimicking the trajectory of the chariot. From there, the carriage took a swift right turn over King William Street. It was headed south, it seemed, in the direction of the Thames. The yellow orb followed in its own way up above. Meanwhile, Consivia and Rosenberg chanted more lines from William Blake's Jerusalem. The sun shall be a scythed chariot of Britain, the moon, a ship in the British Ocean. Then something even more dramatic happened, as we all scuttled around the terrace trying to follow their movements. Little St. George tried to grab the reins away from his father angrily and pushed him. The Baron fell out the side of the chariot, but his pants, still around his ankles, got caught up in something on the outside of the chariot. He hung there upside down for a few seconds, flailing while his son tried unsuccessfully to control the horses. As this was occurring, the glowing orb above behaved sympathetically in tandem, jumping about in an erratic, herky-jerky manner. The chariot took a sharp left, heading northwest, over the Walbrook building, towards Rosenberg Plaza, the sun-like object and the moon mirroring this above. Then, as the horses, the chariot, and its occupants suddenly lost their aerial volatility, everybody ran to the south side of the roof to watch the horror unfold. It was just like when Wile E. Coyote runs off a cliff and doesn't fall until he looks down. The chariot plummeted, crashing through the sunroof at the main building of Rosenberg Plaza. The air was filled with the sound of the glass cracking and the final screams of the boy, man, and horses. I knew that, due to the way the building was designed, nothing would stop their fall until they hit the vortex over the lobby. I assumed that was where they probably landed. So too did the architects of the ritual, Consivia and Rosenberg, for they must have planned it all ahead of time somehow. As the chariot crashed down, they sang out in unison another line from Jerusalem. "I'll be on the vortex of the dead." I looked up, the moon was there, At the very top of the arch of the sky, still transformed in appearance, the sun-like object was no longer visible. There was a moment of silence. Actually, about 3 minutes, probably. Everyone was shocked and amazed at what they had just seen. Nobody knew what to say, or if they were allowed to speak. Finally, Rosenberg spoke up. He turned around to face the congregation and announced that we would all be heading back to Rosenberg Plaza through the tunnels immediately. I will select a core group of helpers to assist me in inspecting the damage and cleaning up the bodies at the main building. Most of you can take the tunnels over to the coffin house. There are rooms with soft beds waiting for you there. Tomorrow is Shabbat, a day of rest. My servants, both human and electronic, will make sure you receive all you need to relax and recuperate. The rites will resume at dawn on Sunday. There was an audible, collective sigh of relief that passed through the crowd in a wave. I guess even the most evil people in the world get tired after a 6-hour orgy of rape, murder, and fantastic supernatural events. We were all beaten up, me more than anyone still living, and even though I knew my death could not be far away, I welcomed the thought that I might be able to sleep, until then at least. But it was not to be. Rosenberg walked straight up to me and Chesterfield as the others piled into the elevators. You two will have to come with us to the main building. I need you, Ms. Auger, to assist me once more tonight. Then I'll arrange for someone to work on fixing up your legs. Agent Chesterfield, please push the wheelchair and accompany us. Rosenberg turned around and began talking to one of the ravens. I looked at Chesterfield, who was wincing at the thought that our torture was to continue onward tonight. He pushed my chair towards the elevator, and I closed my eyes, hoping I could make myself sleep on the ride over. But I couldn't. The morphine was wearing off again. Chapter 23, Prison Coffin. The womb breeds, whereas the Eye of Horus does not. Or, if it does so, breeds, according to the Turkish tradition, a Messiah. Aleister Crowley, The Book of Lies. The sight that awaited us as Castle Rosenberg was as amazing as it was disturbing. The boy, the girl, the chariot, and the 4 horses had plunged down into the vortex between the first and second floor. However, they had only broken through the glass on top, and hadn't fallen through the bottom. The rest of the feature remained intact, full of its mysterious fluids which, whatever they were, stank to high heaven now that the top of the container had been broken. The sight of the dead child and horses floating in the vat of sewage soup was heart-wrenching to me and Chesterfield, but it was the stench of the vortex that brought tears to the eyes of all who were present. We, the select group of 12, including me, Chesterfield, Rosenberg, Miles, and Leopold, among others, walked up the ramp, all the way to the top, so that we could get a good look at the rest of the damage. Right away from the second floor, we could see Baron Carrickfergus hanging from the ceiling, suspended horizontally with his front pointed down. As we got closer, I could see that he'd gotten hung up by his own clothing on the rafters of the ceiling beneath the broken sunroof. His top half was hanging by his robe, due to the way in which the fabric right between his shoulder blades had gotten torn and hooked to one of the rafters. His arms, stuck in the sleeves, jutted out sideways from his body. His bottom half was hanging by his trousers, which were still around his ankles. He was nude from his ankles to his armpits, since he hadn't been wearing underpants. As I stared at the body of the man hung from the ceiling, I noticed that, when looked at from directly down below, it formed a perfect lowercase T shape. His sun mask had been wrenched around to the back of his head. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, almost plastic-looking. Bruises and cuts could be seen all over his exposed flesh. Behind him, through the round, broken sunroof, that strange-looking moon was framed perfectly. One of the ravens, who apparently worked for Rosenberg's company, took off his mask and robe, revealing a light blue business suit. Prompted by his example, everyone else began doing the same. He then went into one of the few closed offices on the upper floor. A few moments later, he emerged with a drone mounted with a camera and some other equipment, which he flew up to the ceiling to inspect the Baron's body. It featured a small medical robot on board, which was able to scan him for vital signs. Shortly after the inspection, the guy flying the drone announced that the Baron was not entirely dead. It's hard to say which, of all the bizarre things I observed during this adventure, was the most odd and bewildering. But at that moment, the strangeness of how the body was arranged, and how it had gotten there, was overshadowed by what Rosenberg ordered his barber surgeons to do next. The drone was brought down, and then the barber surgeons, now without their robes and veils, began outfitting the robot medic with tools and medicines. They supplied it with a variety of tubes and vials of fluid mounted into onboard injector guns. Leopold was in charge of this and instructed them on what to do. The drone was flown once again to where Baron Carrickfergus was hanging. The injector gun shot their contents into his barely breathing body. Then a tube was inserted into one of the arms, gently, without causing the fabric that the body was hanging from to rip any further. Then the tube was slowly unraveled from the wheeled dispenser that it was mounted on, as blood began to flow through it. It was strung up over one of the rafters and then brought down to the top floor, where it was inserted into a foot-tall, bulb-shaped glass bottle without spilling a drop. This process was repeated again. This time, a tube was inserted into the urethra. A much smaller amount of fluid, yellow urine, was collected from this tap into another bottle. We watched it all unfold, mesmerized, from a set of couches that formed a meeting area on the top floor. Chesterfield fell asleep on one of the couches next to me. I was starting to doze off in my wheelchair, despite the increased pain in my legs, when Rosenberg and Leopold approached me. Chesterfield didn't stir. "Let this man take you to a room at the coffin house where he can give you a bit of medical attention," said Rosenberg. "He will ask you some questions when this is done. Be as truthful with him as you have been with me. The stakes are just as high." He called him this man, I thought to myself. So he still hasn't figured out that I already know Leopold, and Leopold knows this now, but has chosen not to point it out. I thought about what had happened since the butcher meeting at Oriental Club was interrupted by the police. Leopold had disappeared from custody while in a highly unusual private interrogation by Director Pindar himself. Chesterfield, Paris, and I had all assumed that Leopold had kidnapped the director, then later murdered him at Temple Bar in Paternoster Square. After all, we already knew he was a butcher, a kidnapper, and a known liar running an organized criminal enterprise, supposedly. We already knew he was involved with a secret society that committed bloody sacrifices in secret tunnels underneath London. Yet we didn't know anything about Rosenberg then, and therefore his potential connection to the events had not been taken into consideration. For those few minutes after we heard that Leopold and Pindar were missing, we all thought that Pindar was corrupt and had helped him escape somehow. But once we knew about Pindar's death, it seemed more likely that he had been kidnapped and murdered by Leopold as part of his escape from police custody. When we learned about Rosenberg, we all began to suspect that he might be involved as well. When Leopold showed himself during the ritual at the Mithraeum, I had proof that they were working together, and that Miles was working for Rosenberg too. Whatever he told them to do, they did. Everyone seemed to treat Rosenberg that way. Even the most powerful men in the kingdom, whom I had seen murdered tonight. Baron Carrickfergus being apparently vegetative and legally dead, although there may be exceptions in British law for a man in his position. So what does it mean then, I thought, that Leopold hasn't told him that I was the reason he got arrested in the first place, and the reason he was being interrogated by Director Pindar? It means there's hope, that's what, I thought. It means it's possible that Leopold isn't entirely on Rosenberg's side after all. Maybe he's just cooperating under duress like so many of Rosenberg's other partners in crime seem to be doing. I recalled that the butchers at Oriental Club seemed outraged somehow by Rosenberg, although I didn't know it was him they were speaking of at the time. They said that he was trying to do something catastrophic and dangerous out of personal greed and ambition, to which they objected, collapsing the pillars of heaven. Chicken Little? Yes. But after all I had seen tonight, and the things I'd heard both Rosenberg and Concivia say, I couldn't afford not to take the accusation seriously. Then I heard, for the first time in a while, the voice of my psychic informant counseling me in my head. "Go with it," the voice said. "Let him help you." As Leopold wheeled me down the spiral ramp and over to Coffin House through one of the sky bridges between the two buildings, I drifted off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was waking up from a deep sleep in a hospital bed, inside of an empty office that had been set up as a makeshift operating room. There was bright sunlight coming through a large window across the room from me and to my right. I was stretched out on a hospital bed, and the pain in my legs had taken on a new form. I looked down and discovered why. Both of my feet and ankles had been amputated. I screamed when I took the sheet away. The realization of what had been done to me filled me with such grief that I cried for 20 minutes. Then the pain in my legs prompted me to punch a red button positioned on a box sitting on a nightstand next to my bed. As I did so, I began to vaguely recall being told by Leopold what that button was for, before I went to sleep there. We had talked for a few minutes, I remembered. I couldn't deduce what about yet, but I did remember him giving me an anesthetic injection. He told me to push the red button as soon as I woke up. I asked him what he was doing this for. As I fell rapidly into deep oblivion, I recalled, he told me that my legs needed to go. He suggested that if I somehow survived this ordeal, I should try to stick around the UK for a while so I could get prosthetics and physical therapy through the National Health Service. Promptly, Leopold showed up with another shot of morphine, a cup of coffee, and a jelly roll. Actually, 2 coffees and jelly rolls. One set was for him. He sat on a chair against the wall next to me, and we both ate in silence. I didn't care anymore about what kind of gross things might be hidden in the food at this cursed place. I went into waves of sobbing every few minutes. He made no attempt to comfort or distract me, but merely looked away uncomfortably. Finally he spoke. I have some good news for you. Miles and I discovered a friend of yours sneaking around in the Mithraeum as I was gathering up my equipment. We were able to smuggle him over here without alerting Rosenberg. Sure, everything he does is being caught on camera, but unless his security robots alert Rosenberg to suspicious activity, most likely nobody will review the footage. If the robots had issued any alerts, I think I would have found out by now. Who is this friend of mine? I said, the only people I know here in town are you and Chesterfield and Miles, and now Rosenberg's sick gang. And clearly only Chesterfield is my friend. Leopold looked hurt. Hey, I know we've done things you don't approve of, and you think you're in a position to judge us morally, but you don't understand why we have done these things. And surely you know that I have risked my life repeatedly to try to help you, to try to save us all from what may come of this experiment in psychopathy. As he spoke, some of the previous night's conversation came back to me. Yes, now I remember, I thought silently. He is on my side, or so he says. He had told me this secret truth, that he and others in the Worshipful Society of Butchers had just discovered, with help from me, that Rosenberg's Mithras cult had been operating behind the seats of power within the kingdom. For years, this was because of his wealth, along with his seemingly magical ability to manipulate stock, bond, currency, and precious metal markets. It had something to do with the Niptron terminal, which Leopold admitted he himself didn't fully understand, and therefore couldn't explain. Rosenberg controlled vast numbers of media companies that repeated his propaganda. Through his contacts in the police, intelligence, and security sectors, he had acquired blackmail material on just about everybody. More than that, as we had seen demonstrated in the Mithraeum with Marcia the night before, Rosenberg did not observe the quote, honor among thieves decorum as expected. The whole idea behind the surreptitious videotaping of child rape and murder parties / rituals was mutually assured destruction. Everyone knew that the others present were guilty of the same atrocities. Therefore, nobody ever dared carry out any of the unspoken threats that kept each individual operator in the oligarchy from trying to dominate the others. But Rosenberg didn't hesitate, giving him leverage over the Rothschilds, the royal family, and many others. Because of his influence on them, he had de facto control of populations the world over. Then he began searching for a higher realm to rule over, Leopold had said. Upon remembering that part, my memory became blurry again. So where is the friend of mine that you found? I asked. He's with his partner, Chesterfield, he answered. They're in a room across the hall. I'll bring them in soon, when I feel it's least risky to do so. Agent Paris? I thought. I wonder how he got inside. There was a knock on the door. It was Miles, and he was, for once, not brandishing a gun. He also had a softer look on his face than I'd seen before. Were they really just acting the part of Rosenberg's loyal henchmen last night? I thought to myself, is it possible that they not only stood by but actively participated in everything that happened? Leopold helping him with the butchery and the medical aspects. Miles standing guard this whole time, preventing us from leaving, with the ultimate intention of finding a way to stop him? It was all very confusing and frightening. Then there was the fact that they had taken my feet from me, a harsh truth that I confronted once again when Leopold and Miles picked me up from the bed to wheel me over to the window while they switched out my bedpan. I guess the privilege of having my decency spared by the Butcher Society has now been forfeited, I thought, remembering how they had been kind enough to have me bathed by a female at the Oriental Club. I wonder if they're going to give my urine to Rosenberg to do alchemy with. The window was tinted on the other side, which let the perfect amount of light in while filtering the glare. I noted that my room seemed to be very high up, probably on one of the upper floors of the 10-story building, and that we were on the southeastern corner, at the intersection of Cannon Street and Walbrook. I sat there, watching the giant orange sun rising behind the southeastern edge of the Walbrook building across the street, and thought about my current status as a cripple. They intentionally broke my legs, I reminded myself, and Leopold himself made the cuts last night, supposedly for my own good. But why should I believe him? I didn't want to look at either Leopold or Miles. I could not forgive Leopold for suckering me into this situation with his lies, nor for consorting with this network of rape and murder clubs in the first place. This was secondary to the fact that everything about his public persona was a lie. I don't care what side you're on now, I thought. You got yourself into this mess, but you got me involved through fraud. I was glad when they both took their leave of the room, but that left me alone, with nothing but my traumatic memories and the realization that I would never walk on my own 2 feet again. So I was also glad again when Miles returned a few minutes later, this time with Paris and Chesterfield. Then Miles ducked out to give us some privacy, saying he'd be back in 20 minutes. Paris and Chesterfield were both wearing very expensive-looking black suits, with the collars open and no ties. These were undoubtedly provided by the house. Neither of them could afford such clothes. They both looked like they had bathed, a condition I envied. But thinking about that made me aware of the fact that Leopold had at least washed the bull blood from my hair, face, and neck, for which I was grateful. It seemed they both had been told about the loss of my feet. They didn't look surprised, really, but horrified when they actually laid eyes on me. Chesterfield tried not to show it, but Paris stared for a while before he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wish I could have gotten here sooner. I wish I could have stopped them from doing this to you. They killed a 12-year-old girl last night, after raping her for hours, and a little boy after abusing him. And they raped dozens of other children. And the little boy they killed, I'm pretty sure was—" "He knows," Chesterfield said, as if to shush me, as if it was something so horrible, so dangerous to the kingdom that it shouldn't be spoken aloud. "They wiped out almost the entire line of succession," I said. "And they did it to each other. Both the Baron Carrick-Fergus and the Duke of Rothesay. They both hurt so many children, including their own little boy." "He knows," Chesterfield repeated, sounding angry. "Yes, I know," said Agent Paris, staring blankly out the window at the sun. "I know what they are capable of, that family. They compromised the kingdom, which is now totally in the hands of a complete psychopath, thanks to them." "And do the British people know what's happened yet, to the Duke and the Baron?" I asked. "Not last time I checked. I don't know what's going on anymore. That Thomas Weir guy took our phones, said it was for our own good, to keep us from getting caught. He claims he wants to help us, says he's running some kind of undercover op on Rosenberg, but he can't tell me who he's really working for. Yet it seems to me that he and this Miles guy are the ones keeping us from leaving." "How did you get in here in the first place?" I asked. He sat down on my bed and continued to stare, now at the wall. He explained what had happened slowly, as if lost in his own thoughts. "My meeting with Miss Equitone and Scotland Yard was pro forma and utterly meaningless," he said. "Afterwards, I spent some time researching in-house files about the history of this site, Bucklersbury, the Mithraeum, etc. I looked at more permit applications for Rosenberg Plaza and realized that he's constructed a well that leads down to the old Walbrook River underground." "That well connects to the Walbrook?" I said in surprise. "I thought the Walbrook was dry." "I thought so too," said Paris. "I've seen for myself that it certainly isn't." Then he spaced out for a moment, lost in memories. "I thought about the well in the corner of the Mithraeum, out from which the orbs containing the souls of Venus, Mars, and the Moon had appeared. Then I thought about how, while outside on the rooftop of New Court, we had seen Jupiter, Saturn, and the sun-like object appear to eject certain essences down below, in an area to the south of us, quite possibly right where the River Thames was. These ejections took the form of a golden chain, a blue ray, and a yellow liquid. Moments after each ejection was made, a ball of light resembling the orb that made the secretion would come out of the construction chute hanging below the skybox. This was connected to the Rothschilds' secret royal pissing conduit, and to the Walbrook, which was itself connected to the Thames. Did the souls of the first 3 planetary archons travel upstream from the Thames, through the Walbrook, and into the well in the Mithraeum? I wondered. Did the others travel up to the rooftop terrace at Newcourt via the conduit and the construction chute? Also, I thought to myself, why had he only invoked 6? What about Mercury? And what entity did Consivia invoke into herself? Was it Mete? If so, what does that mean exactly? My meditation was interrupted when Agent Paris halted his own reverie and continued his story. Then I spent the next few hours poring over files about the old underground rivers here in London. Not computer files, but the physical files in the old vaults of basement level 1. "I'm surprised that didn't arouse suspicion," said Chesterfield. "Nobody ever goes there." "It did arouse suspicion," said Paris. "But anyway, I figured out how the culverts that were built for them intersect with various other subterranean structures. There are so many abandoned subway lines, including all the ones that used to be run by the Postal Service. If you know what you're doing, you can actually travel almost anywhere in Greater London without coming up for air and without using public transportation. There must be loads of nefarious deeds going on underground here all the time, I thought. It's all illegal, of course, but I'm doing an investigation on Her Majesty's service, so I figured I had the right. I thought I would just see how far I could get. So I started at the entrance to the River Tyburn, which runs right between Thames House and Millbank Tower. There's a tunnel there that can be accessed from a sewer hole in basement level 2 of Thames House. "Wow," said Chesterfield. "You found documents on the secret tunnel entrance at Thames House in the file cabinets?" "No," said Paris. "Miss Equitone told me about it. She walked in on me ransacking the files. She told me I needed to go to the Mithraeum and rescue Chesterfield right away, but she said I would have to go alone and that I should travel underground to avoid being seen. Then she urged me to hurry up and practically shoved me in the elevator to go down to the second basement." "Oh my," said Chesterfield. "There must be nobody in the whole service that she trusts. The whole bloody country, taken over in one night." He trailed off. Paris continued. "I found my way from there, or at least, I found some tunnels underneath the Mithraeum. Then Thomas Weir discovered me a couple of hours ago, as he was walking down the hallway with a wheelbarrow full of human body parts. And he brought me here to Chesterfield's room, where I've been hiding out, catching up on recent events at Rosenberg Plaza. Tell me, Pamela, have you been to the lavatory yet?" I became embarrassed. "No," I said. "I have a bedpan, and I'm not really eager to see myself in the mirror right now." "Well, you should at least look through the little sunroof. There's one in Chesterfield's lavatory. You probably have one too." Chesterfield was already in the bathroom, checking it out. "Yup, she's got one," he said. "Come look, Pamela." "At what?" I asked. Paris wheeled me in there. Sure enough, there was sunlight coming through a 9-inch glass-covered aperture in the ceiling. After being positioned directly beneath it, I looked up, carefully avoiding the mirror, and saw what looked like the sun at its zenith, the exact same place in the sky that the moon had been in the last time I'd seen it the night before. This made no sense, of course, at least when I first saw it. "How can the sun be up there when it's rising in the east behind the Walbrook building right now?" I asked. "I just saw it through the window." I continued staring at it in awe, with no ill effects on my eyes. "Yeah, my watch says 9:10 a.m., said Chesterfield, showing me the face of the black Citizen Eco-Drive perpetual chronometer strapped to his wrist. "That's right," said Leopold as the door opened suddenly. We all turned around to look at him, quite startled. He wheeled in a tray with a tea kettle and 3 cups with saucers underneath them. "Sol is stuck at his meridian for the time being," he continued as he poured out 3 cups of tea. "He's also lost most of his luminosity, but Sol Novus is on the horizon." "What do you mean?" the 3 of us asked him simultaneously. "Because there are 2 suns presently competing for supremacy, and the final battle won't play itself out till Easter Sunday," he answered. That is the craziest thing I've heard yet, I thought, as Paris wheeled me back into the main room. As I was pushed past the window, I noticed that the sun's disk was no longer in view from there. Paris and Chesterfield both sat down on my hospital bed and looked at Leopold with hostility. "So you're telling me it's going to stay like this until tomorrow?" I said. "Won't people be panicking in the streets?" "I don't think most of them have noticed it, and most of them won't," Leopold replied. "Something seems to be having a soporific effect on the populace." "So how many other people are here?" I asked. "You mean in this building?" said Leopold. "Yes," I said. "In the coffin house. I know that all the folks from last night's ritual were told to sleep here last night. Are they still here? Is there anybody else here?" "This building's listed as unoccupied right now," said Chesterfield. "There aren't supposed to be any tenants yet, but obviously there are." "There were 729 occupants in the beginning," answered Leopold, "when they contracted Pindar as their lead victimarius almost a year ago. He was a member of the Butchers, but we didn't know he was doing this. The victims were all orphans or children taken from troubled homes. He's killed off 2 per night, 1 male and 1 female, every day since, after having them raped, of course. But these were all just preliminary sacrifices leading up to the main season of festivities, which started last Tuesday on the equinox. They are now culminating with this weekend's supreme rite, which began last night, and it will continue through Sunday." We sat slack-jawed, staring at him, horrified anew. He continued, looking out the window with weariness. "We got wind that someone nearby was doing a working to collapse the pillars of heaven, but we didn't know who or what exactly was involved. That's why we brought you in, and you helped us figure out who it was. But Pindar had already betrayed Rosenberg to the security services. So Rosenberg had him kidnapped, and me. I pretended to be interested in working with him, and I got the butchers and barber surgeons to play along. That way we can subtly sabotage him, although we must be quite careful that he doesn't figure out what's really going on." "So now you've got a company of barber surgeons too?" interjected Paris. "What a bunch of baloney. The barber surgeons were phased out as a livery company in 1745. I don't get my hair cut by a doctor. This is just as fake as your bullshit company of butchers and your hoax barony." "You know so little," said Leopold between clenched teeth, glaring icily at Paris, "about the way things actually work. Rosenberg, he wouldn't have contracted Pindar to do this kind of stuff unless the butchers and barber surgeons were already doing it before," I said. "I saw you kill the bull. I saw butchers and barber surgeons raping kids last night. But you say you're on our side? If you want to stop murdering and raping, just stop. Help us leave here, kill Rosenberg, and set the other captives free, if there are any. Just do the right thing, finally." He stood there stiffly, looking away from everyone for a moment longer. Then he turned around to face us. "The blood and tears of so-called innocent children are the glue that holds this society together. Any society throughout history, in fact. The goddess wants blood. She wants brains. She wants skin and fat and testicles and eyeballs. She wants to fuck. She wants to fuck kids and cows and the King of Spain and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve. And if she doesn't get what she wants, everybody pays the price. These are just some of the things you three don't understand about power, and never will." Leopold's face had turned red, and his voice trembled with emotion when he spoke, as though he was really making a profound philosophical statement. "By what criteria, then, is he calling Rosenberg a psychopath, if this is his own mentality?" I wondered, Leopold continued. "It takes humility to approach the altars of the gods. You must know that your puny peasant morality is not theirs. You must understand that the food chain of the universe cannot be denied." "So what's Rosenberg doing wrong, in your estimation?" asked Chesterfield. "He's killing and raping for the gods, too." "Not at all. He is killing and raping the gods themselves, can't you see? He's trying to defeat them. He's trying to bring down the host of heaven and take the place of the immortals himself. With each planetary archon that was killed last night, he climbed another step up the heavenly staircase. When he gets to the top, 2 things will happen." We all looked at him silently, spitefully, waiting to hear the 2 things. "Either he will become the new chief of the archons, ruling us here below with omnipotent power from the realm beyond, or he will snuff us out and start another universe to rule over, or he snuffs out everything all at once accidentally, by causing the layers of existence to crash down on one another catastrophically. "That's 3 things," said Chesterfield, "and they all sound ridiculous." "The layers of heaven have already started to collapse," said Leopold. "It's happened quickly, yet so smoothly that you didn't recognize it for what it was. You just thought there were large orbs of light in the sky. You didn't realize that divine, august immortals were being enticed to lower themselves into physicality, then forced to bow down to an arrogant thug, who didn't even have the decency to spare their lives after they submitted. Now they're all dead except for the sun and, at least in part, the moon. He's going to torture them both, till tomorrow, when the womb opens up, and then he'll have a new victim to torment." "What womb?" I said. "What's going to open up?" "The womb of the mother of the gods. That's all that's left of poor Philippine." "Oh no, not again," said Agent Paris to Leopold. "You're keeping the womb alive? Another posthumous royal birth?" The agent's eyes looked crazed. Leopold looked at the door. "I have to go do something for Rosenberg," he said. "I don't want to raise any alarm by being tardy. I'll be back later." "You know what I'm talking about, don't you, Butcher?" said Paris, as Leopold put his mangled hand on the doorknob. "Shh," said Leopold, finger to his mouth. "Don't get caught. I'll see you when it's time for her next morphine shot." The door closed behind him. "We tried it. It was locked." "So what were you talking about, Parvain?" said Chesterfield. "What did you mean by—" "Not again." He cleared his throat and then took a deep breath, preparing to tell us another story. "When my dad was working for SIS, he found out that Mossad was blackmailing the royal family. They knew the truth about the princess who died so tragically, and the baby she was carrying." "Oh, wow," said Chesterfield. "So you knew about that." Paris cocked his eyebrow at his partner, curious about what he was referring to. But he didn't stop his storytelling to ask. He continued. "Now, I don't want to bring the princess into disrepute. She was a victim of rape, but in the traditions of our ancestors, the victim of a divine rape was always blamed for it. The idea is that they have somehow enticed a sacred spirit into denigrating his holiness for the lusts of the flesh. That's how Perseus justified his murder of Medusa after she was raped by Poseidon in Athena's temple. This is what conceived Pegasus. But he didn't come out of her body until Perseus gave him an opening." His voice got softer. He lost his train of thought for a moment as he seemed to mutter to himself. Chesterfield and I both leaned in closer, straining to hear, wondering what he was getting at. "The princess was raped by her former husband, who was possessed by a god at the time," my dad said, during a ghastly ritual beneath the palace. "Afterwards, they cloaked her memory. She had no recollection of it. She thought her boyfriend had gotten her pregnant. 3 months later, they offed her, but they harvested her womb." The story was so far syncing up entirely with what Rosenberg had said to the Duke of Rothesay about his ex-wife, the mother of Baron Carrickfergus. But Paris had added some much-needed detail. He continued. "Someone else took the womb," he said, "not one of the family. But they had obviously orchestrated the conception rite as well. And this group performed another ceremony, 6 months later, which Mossad was able to spy on also, according to the reports." "Reports that your dad wrote from SIS?" Chesterfield asked. "Yes," Paris replied, "about reports he had seen in Mossad's own internal documents. Anyway, during this ritual, the womb, which had been kept alive somehow in an incubator, was hung from a ceiling by a couple of meat hooks through the fallopian tubes. It was meant to look like the head of a bull, with the tubes resembling the horns. They put a severed bull's head on the altar behind it to emphasize this point." He took a drink of his now lukewarm cup of tea. Then he went on. "They had a special aperture in the ceiling for admitting lunar rays. When the moon reached the right position and the light hit the uterus, the baby came out, miraculously without defect, and landed on a bed of straw positioned beneath the exit of the womb." "Some miracle," said Chesterfield. "Like Rosemary's Baby is a miracle." "I don't know what happened to the child after that," Paris concluded, "or even what sex it was, and I don't know how the magic of the ritual worked, but I believe my father's story, and I think the baby must have lived on, because Mossad blackmailed them for years after, at the very least." "Well, we do know what happened," said Chesterfield. "The baby was adopted by Marcia Martina and her husband. He was Crispin Martina, Rosenberg's catamite and errand boy. Now he's dead." "Oh yes," said Paris. I know he's dead. I saw his head sitting on top of a wheelbarrow. Suddenly we heard a click. A single click, coming from the door. Now what was that? I wondered. Try the door, came the unexpected reply from my psychic informant, speaking inside of my head once again. Of course, I thought to myself. I should have asked you sooner. I repeated the suggestion about the door to my friends. Okay, said Chesterfield. He walked up and turned the handle. The door opened. It's been unlocked, I thought, remotely. Chesterfield immediately closed it again, except for a tiny crack in which he stuck his finger. He turned around and looked at us. What should we do? He asked. Stick your head out and see if there's anyone in the hall, said Paris. This he did. Not at the moment, Chesterfield replied. Where do we go from here? All three of us? No, you're right, said Paris. Let me go alone. I'll see if I can find us a way out. And so, after a brief reunion, we let Agent Paris slip away from us. We left the door open slightly, but we stayed inside, terrified of being caught trying to escape. We knew the only reason we had been kept alive was because we each were still perceived as somehow useful to Rosenberg. I knew he needed me for something in regards to the next ritual the following day, and Chesterfield was his means of keeping MI5 under wraps now. But surely we will both soon outlive our usefulness, I thought. We didn't see Paris again that day, or Leopold. After an hour, when Leopold didn't return, Chesterfield decided to sneak back across the hall to his room, so that nobody would know Leopold had let him in there. Before he left, he helped me back into bed. A while later, when the drugs were wearing off and the pain in my legs was once again almost beyond what I could bear, a black female servant that I didn't recognize came to change my bedpan again and to give me another shot, along with a turkey sandwich and a packet of tea biscuits. She put me in the wheelchair again so that I could eat sitting next to the window with the food tray beside me. The color of the sunlight and the shadows that it cast indicated late afternoon to me. I sat there staring at the street below for a couple of hours as the sunlight faded away. I didn't see any people go past. Not even in cars. When it was completely gone and night had fallen, I noticed a reddish tinge to things that were illuminated by the light now coming from the buildings and the street lamps. I looked at the bathroom and noticed red light descending from the ceiling. I wheeled myself in there, still not letting my gaze fall upon the mirror, and looked up at the little sunroof. Now, in the exact place where Saul had been earlier, there now stood the moon. It was in the same condition it had been in before, but was fuller and larger. This last part seemed appropriate, since it actually was supposed to be the night of the full moon. But of course, the coloring was completely abnormal. The moon appeared sickly. It was still dark red, fading to brown and then black at the edges, with 3 bright red circles shining within it, one larger than the other 2. The glowing circles in the middle were brighter and bigger than the night before. The craters on the face were again inverted from the way they normally appear in the northern hemisphere. Also, of course, the moon does not usually just suddenly appear at the very top of the sky right after nightfall, as it had that night. Just then, a burly white male servant came in and served me dinner. Roast beef with mashed potatoes, gravy, and asparagus. He helped me get to the toilet, waiting outside the door for me to finish, which was much less humiliating than using the bedpan. I desperately wanted to ask him what was going on with everybody else in the building, but I didn't dare. I just prayed, to which God I knew not, that Chesterfield had made it safely to his room, and that Paris had found a way out of the building. Maybe he's bringing help now, I thought, trying to cheer myself up. Only God can help the 3 of you, said the voice of the psychic informant. Who are you anyway? I said mentally to whoever it was. Why don't you come and see for yourself, was the reply I received. I heard the clicking sound on the door again. Try the door, the voice said. I wheeled over to it, grabbed the knob, and pulled it open. It was indeed unlocked again. I held my breath, listening for anybody. I heard nothing, so I turned my chair backwards and maneuvered myself through the doorway, not without making a little racket, which worried me immensely. But when I got out into the hallway, it was still dark, empty and silent, just a long corridor full of locked doors. Then the lights came on above me. The digital ceiling, I thought. You sensed me. Fuck you. Don't worry about that, said the voice. It's the security robots you need to watch out for. And only if they think you're suspicious. Rosenberg's asleep. The rest of the group is so compartmentalized, nobody knows if you're supposed to be out of your room or not. Keep your own eyes open for danger. But let me guide you. I have so much to show you. I had practiced divination many times before, mostly on the Ouija board. I had never had such a clearly spoken entity dictate to me in my head like this until it started spontaneously the previous night. I had spoken to gods, demons, servitors, and disembodied human spirits on the Ouija board. The gods and demons all had very unique, poetic, and eloquent ways of speaking, but the people all talked like people. This voice had tried to come off as godlike or demonic in the very beginning, when it was dictating how the rituals should go. But now, its choice of words sounded more human, yet I felt sure it was the same voice. So where should I go now? I asked the spirit. This is the day of rest. Come to the room of rest, it said. Mind your P's and Q's. Which way? I said in my head. Get to the 6th floor, the voice said. I looked at the door of my room. 729. That was the same room number I'd had at the Regent Palace, I thought. And Leopold had said 729 children had been held captive here at Coffin House, murdered over the course of the last year. It means something. I've read about it recently. I just can't remember. I saw an elevator up ahead. I wheeled myself over to it and pushed the down arrow button, but then I heard something down the hallway, around the corner. I ducked back into my room, which I had sensibly not closed the door to completely. I still kept it open a crack so I could get out again, and I waited. I heard something, a motorized vehicle moving down the hallway. A security robot, I thought. It paused in front of my door, no doubt alerted by the fact that the lights in the hallway were on. But it didn't seem to notice that the door was ajar, because it eventually moved on. I watched its shadow travel down the hallway and around the corner through the slit between the jamb and the slightly open door. Then I heard the elevator ding. It may be a digital super building, I thought to myself, but the elevators are slow as snot. I quickly wheeled myself out and into the elevator just before the doors closed. It was already on its way down to the 2nd floor, so I hit the 6 button, hoping I could just get off on that floor without running into anybody else. When the elevator opened, I was at first relieved not to see anybody standing in front of it. I had turned my wheelchair around backwards and was using the mirrored walls to check what was behind me. Then I pushed myself up and arched backwards to peek down the hallway both ways. Nobody here, I thought. Phew. Just then the elevator doors slammed against the sides of my chair. They opened again automatically, but it was a bit of a struggle to get the rest of myself through the opening before they closed again. They almost smashed into the swollen and still bleeding stubs of my legs, but I managed to pull through before that happened. Now, said the voice in my head, follow the trail of blood. What? I thought. But I looked down, and sure enough, there was a trail of dark brown spots on the white carpet, leading from the elevator down the hall, then off to the right at the fork. I followed. As I rolled along, segments of the ceiling switched on to illuminate the path ahead, while the ones behind me shut themselves off. This brought me to one of the sky bridges that linked the coffin house with the main building, with walls of translucent glass. Looking out, I noticed that the city appeared to be cast in a strange purple light, and everything looked very queer. I couldn't tell if this light was actually coming from outside, or was radiating from some source inside that I wasn't able to perceive, coloring my view of what was outside. Inside the sky bridge, this light caused the white carpet to gleam brightly, while the blood trail now looked dark purple in some places, black in others. I rolled across the bridge, which was about 20 feet wide, over to the other building. The corridor ended quite strangely. It looked like a single glass door until I got up within 5 feet of it. Then, for a moment, it took on the appearance of a mirror, causing me to stop quickly to avoid running into it. When I got 2 feet closer, where the blood trail ended, I could see that it was a transparent glass wall with 3 different slots you could go through, each leading to a different part of the trefoil ramp that ran through the main building. According to the signage, you could go down through the left to get to the recycling center, down through the right to get to the Rosenberg Privy Chamber, or up through the middle to get to the executive restroom. I looked behind me quickly to make sure nobody was coming. Then I closed my eyes and attempted to clear my mind for a second. Which way should I go? I asked my unseen informant. Now follow the light, it said. I looked through each of the slots. Only one had a path that was illuminated at all, the one in the middle. I could see a path ahead there, lined with two bright yellow-green stripes. Whatever was behind the other two slots was completely dark. I went through the center slot and rolled my wheelchair up the incline. At first, I thought that these glowing yellow-green strips were just artificial lighting to illuminate the path, like the colored strips that light the aisles of movie theaters. Then I realized that these were the tubes that ran throughout the building, which I had seen the day before flowing with a pale yellow substance. It looked like urine yesterday, and I had assumed that these tubes were emptying into the vortex. Now, for some reason, the fluid inside was fluorescent. The area was bathed in a purplish light that seemed to be coming from above, like what I had seen lighting the city when I was on the sky bridge. But here it was more intense. Other than this light, the place was completely dark. Black light, I thought. That's what's making things glow. But where's it coming from? Then it came to me. I realized that I was at the top floor of the main building, towards the middle. That means I'm underneath the big sunroof, I thought to myself. And underneath Baron Carrickfergus. I looked up. Sure enough, there he was, with the purple light coming in from behind him through a clear plastic tarp, perfectly clear like saran wrap, that had been placed over the broken glass panels. The exact source of the strange light was still unclear, from my perspective. It made his pale, white, mostly nude body gleam brightly, as well as a circle with a dot in the middle, the alchemical symbol for the sun or gold that had been painted over his navel with something that glowed bright red. The Baron's middle had drooped down quite a bit. The legs and neck had now been secured to the rafters with black wire. The effect was that his body now formed a circle, curled backwards on itself, just like the headless body of Pindar hanging from the ceiling at Temple Bar. But Baron Carrickfergus still had his head, now almost touching his feet, up above his drooping belly. His head had been positioned so that it faced straight up at the ceiling. The bright red sun symbol on his stomach moved up and down slightly. It was still alive. Further proof of life came from the erect penis, which also hung down beneath him, attached to what seemed to be a sort of penis pump, which itself was attached to a tube, like the ones I had seen inserted directly into his body earlier. It was again connected to a small, thin glass vessel, this time held below by a drone that hovered directly below him. The pump was moving up and down, much like the pistons of a cow milking machine. The purpose was presently ascertained when the Baron's body began to quake. Sperm shot out in globules that just glowed bright green, dripping down and filling about 3/4 of the bottle. Then the drone pulled the tube out of the bottle, sealed it with a cap, and retracted the penis pump. It flew down to the top floor with its cargo, right past my head. I couldn't figure out why the sperm was that color, or why it was glowing so brightly, but it allowed me to follow the drone with my eyes in the darkness. The drone then traveled to a door on my right and seemed to insert the bottle into the wall, about 5 feet up from the floor. There was a sucking sound, and the bottle disappeared. Apparently it was a pneumatic tube system. I looked at the door next to it, which, from what I could tell, was painted a dark color. There was a strange plaque on it, about 6 inches square, appearing hot pink in the UV light, and adorned with characters that glowed neon green. There was a 3x3 grid displayed on it, a tic-tac-toe board with 2 solid circles in the middle square. This, I knew, was the alchemical symbol for zinc. I noted to myself that zinc is used most often in making fluorescent pigments and plastics. Inside of each of the other squares on the grid were other sigils. These included 2 Uranus symbols, like the one at the top of the message left with Pindar's body. There was one in the upper left corner and one on the bottom right, both with their arrows pointing towards the bottom right. In the middle square on the right was a sign for Pluto, and in the middle left, a symbol for Saturn. In the upper right and lower left squares, I recognized the alchemical symbol for arsenic, and in the top middle, the alchemical symbol for platinum, which consists of the symbols for the sun and moon squeezed together. In the bottom middle was a representation of the diamond, with 8 facets delineated on its face. I recalled the voice's cryptic message, "Mind your P's and Q's." I realized that the way the arrows were pointing on the Uranus sigil made them look like the letter Q. The arsenic signs looked somewhat like the letter A. The Pluto symbols resembled the letter P. The Saturn insignia looked like an H. Therefore, the characters in the right and left columns spelled a word. This must be the Kafka, I thought. This is the secret private bathroom for Rosenberg's special employees, and I'll bet I know what the invisible ink on the door is. Suddenly, the black light disappeared, and so did the characters. I could see almost nothing, but the drone was still shining its headlight as it flew away and descended into the shadowy depths below. Maybe I've been still for too long, I thought. Maybe if I move around, the digital ceiling will strike up the black light again. Or any light, though I must admit I prefer the black light. It's easier to hide in. Then, just as suddenly, and again for no obvious reason, the black light returned. I looked up. I was certain now that it was streaming in through the sunroof, where the purple glow was concentrated. But from what? I thought. Something on top of the building? I rolled up to the door, pulled my sleeve over my right hand for sanitary reasons, and tried the handle. Unsurprisingly, it didn't open. "How do I get in?" I asked my invisible friend. "You have to pay a token," said the voice. "Where do I get one of those?" I said mentally. "Look inside your pocket," said the voice. I reached down into the pockets of my hospital gown. Indeed, in the pocket on the right side there was a single coin, about the size of a quarter and made of glowing green glass, impressed with a picture on each side. Vaseline glass, I thought. Uranium. It glows green in the UV light. On one side was the Uranus symbol. On the other side was the image of a king with a beard on a throne. A young man was standing in front of him, bent forward, as the king prepared to swallow his head whole into his mouth. Then I noticed that in between the two circles in the center square of the plaque on the door was a slot, barely visible to me, which I thought might be big enough for the coin to go through. I inserted it and heard a clunk, then a click. The door opened. It was dark inside, but here too it was illuminated in blacklight. I could tell because body fluid spritzed all over the room gleamed brightly, but of it, a yellow-green color, like the tubes lining the ramp. There were also stains that glowed more faintly with a light blue appearance. I figured that the yellow-green stuff was urine, and the light blue substance was probably semen. Much of the latter was concentrated around one particular area of the wall opposite the door, and also on the floor near there. There, about waist-high on the wall, were two Latin words painted with a fluorescent green pigment, Cum Deo. I pushed my chair through the door and rolled into the blackness towards the glowing words. I heard the door shut behind me. I turned around and tried to open it back up, but I could not. I was trapped. "So you told me how to get into this room," I said mentally to my informant. "Now tell me why, and tell me how to get out." "All will be revealed momentarily," it answered. I looked up and saw that the room had a roof that was clear glass, faceted in such a way that the black light coming through from above gave it the appearance of a purple rose. I felt around for a light switch but couldn't find one. All artificial light is automatically controlled by the digital ceiling, I remembered. So the UV light that's coming through the sunroof is tricking the system into thinking it's daylight. I wonder if it's damaging my eyes. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching. I pushed myself as far back into the farthest corner as I could. I heard the person step up to the door, and then a series of clicks. The door opened. With only black light coming from above, I couldn't make out anything. But luckily the person couldn't see me either. I heard the person grunt. It sounded male. A safe bet in a place like this. The door shut behind him. I had him unbuckle and unzip his pants. The buckle clanged as it dropped to the floor. Then I heard the flick of a plastic cigarette lighter and saw the flame. As my eyes adjusted in that brief second of additional light, I could make out the person in front of me lighting a cigarette. It was Dennis. His teeth and the whites of his eyes glowed white in the black light. Luckily, he was staring straight ahead at the wall opposite the door, away from me. He was staring at the words Cum Deo. When the lighter was lit, I could see that they were painted in fluorescent green on a small circular metal door in the wall. Dennis approached this wall, waddling with his pants around his ankles, slouching backward. He held his short and thin but erect member casually in front of him as he flicked it around. Then he touched something on the wall, and the CUMDEO door slid open, revealing a round hole cushioned with a soft plastic material resembling the stuff that stress balls are made from. It looked pink in the ultraviolet light. Dennis grunted again, and the wall began to emit a soft hum. He threw his head back and closed his eyes. As he spent the next 68 seconds or so being satisfied by the automatic glory hole, I got a chance to look around the room more. It wasn't at all what I imagined. I thought it would be like the dream executive washroom, with tuxedoed attendants handing you warm towels. Instead, it was a small, dark hole with few features. A square plaque inside of the front door with the same color scheme as the uranium glass coin featured that same illustration of the king swallowing a man's head, but with more detail in the background. Beneath it, there was a poem. When the son entered the father's house, the father took him to his heart and swallowed him out of excessive joy, and that with his own mouth. The great exertion makes the father sweat. I did not recognize this stuff at the time, but I now know that both the poem and the image are from a 17th century alchemical text called the Book of Lamb Spring by Nicholas Barnaud. The other items in the room included a small sink, an automatic hand dryer, a toilet, and a urinal, on the same wall as the QMDEO flap near the corner. The urinal was interesting. It was white, but old-fashioned looking. And of course it was covered with bright yellow-green urine stains, especially in the basin. But on one side of it, glowing blue-white in the UVs like dried semen, were written the words R. Mutt. I recognized this as the name that was written on artist Marcel Duchamp's ready-made statue called Fountain, which was really nothing but a urinal with this name written on it. It was actually the alias of the socialite aristocrat who had given Duchamp the idea of displaying the urinal as an art piece. On the wall, above the urinal, painted in the same substance as R. Mutt, were the words Fountains of Youth, along with a double-headed arrow. One pointed to the urinal below, while the other pointed leftward at the hole where Dennis was currently thrusting his hips at the wall, making poses at it and calling it bitch. As he ejaculated with flair, the device in the wall made a grinding sound. Then there was the sound of something dropping and clanging against a metal surface. A penny saved, a penny earned, the young man said to himself with a chuckle. He put his hand around his junk and attempted to remove his penis from the wall. But something went wrong. "I'm doing this for you," said the voice in my head. "What the fuck is happening?" said Dennis. The alarm in his voice was quite real. He seemed to be unable to pull out of the glory hole. "Oh fuck. Oh fuck. What the fuck am I gonna do?" he screamed, frantic now. I pushed my wheelchair forward. "How do I get out of this room?" I asked, prompted by my informant. The young man nearly jumped out of his skin and screeched, "Whoop!" as I startled him. Lucky for him, he jumped forward and smacked his head into the wall, instead of jumping backwards and ripping his penis off. "How did you get in here?" he said. I didn't reply. "Can you help me get out of this?" he said. Nicer now. "I don't know," I said. "Show me how to get out of this room and I'll get someone else to help you." "Okay," he said. "You'll need the coin to get out, just like you do to get in." He reached down underneath the glory hole, and then underneath another, smaller flap that was there. From this he extracted a Vaseline glass token identical to the first. He handed it out to me. I wheeled forward to grab it. "There's a slot right next to the door," he said. He rested his hands and forehead on the wall in front of him. "Hurry up," he said. "I can't stand here like this much longer." "Where should I go to get help?" I asked. "Go to Rosenberg's privy chamber," he answered. "There's a crossroads on your left. Signs will show you which way to go. A crossroads on your left." What strange words to use, I thought. "Get the key to the outer doorways," the voice in my head said. I demanded this of the lad. He seemed shocked that I knew to ask for this. "I only have the key to Rosenberg's chamber," he said. "Knock first or he'll kill you. The outer doorway key is with him, but there's no way he'll let you have it." "Where's the key you do have?" I demanded. "In the back of my pants," he replied. Great, I thought. And your pants are on the floor, where you can't get them because your penis is stuck in the wall, and I can't get them because they cut off my feet. I had no choice. I positioned the side of my chair parallel to his back and leaned down as far as I could to grab the keys from the back pocket of his jeans. The left pocket yielded nothing. At first I couldn't reach the right pocket. I used the right wheel of my chair to nudge the jeans and push the pocket up a bit. Then I managed to get my fingers in. There I found a set of electronic keys. "Which one's Rosenberg's privy chamber?" I asked. "The one that says 81, he replied, groaning with discomfort. "That's the room number 2. It's not marked otherwise." With that, I turned my wheelchair around, pumped the coin into the slot next to the door, and barreled down the hallway, letting the door slam shut behind me. Wheeling down the ramp was much easier than wheeling up, as you can imagine. Within seconds, I was back at the crossroads at the end of the Sky Bridge, which I still don't understand the nature of. As I approached it from the other side this time, it seemed to suck me in and subsume me. Then suddenly I was presented with the 3 slots again, leading in 3 directions but in a different order compared to what they were before. Now the privy chamber option was in the center, and the recycling center was on my right. Once again I headed down the middle. It felt like I was on an amusement park ride. My wheelchair seemed to move itself through almost empty space. The most visible sights were the ramps spiraling ahead of me and around me, each lined with the glowing tubes. Directly down below, the vortex glowed brightly with the yellow-green fluid, the identity of which was now undeniable. It occurred to me that it was probably covered with a clear tarp, just like the broken sunroof, or else I would have been able to smell the stench of it, like the night before when the top was broken. Philippine, the horses and the broken chariot parts, had been removed. The contrast between this and the darker substance floating within it, along with the body of the dead little boy, was amazing. As my wheelchair winded self-propelled through the twists and turns of the ramp, shooting stars seemed to come out of the darkened dome above me, spreading out over the ceiling, and all over the body of Baron Carrickfergus, glowing like the flecks of urine and jism on the walls of the qapqa. I felt my head spinning as I whirled around. I was getting dizzy, and I wasn't pushing the wheels at all. "Where's it taking me?" I asked my invisible friend. "To paradise," it said. "But remember, I never promised you a rose garden." The catchy tune from Joe South. "Why do you mention it? Rosenberg, Rose Mountain, Rose Cross?" "Just look for the keystone," was the reply, with a hint of exasperation. "Then I'll tell you what to do next." Presently I found myself in front of a door that looked just like the other private office doors I'd seen in that building, what few there were. But it was marked 81. I pulled the key out of my pocket. Dennis told me to knock first, I thought. Otherwise he'll kill me. "Don't knock, surprise him," came the answer from my psychic informant. "Use the ruse that Jupiter used on Saturn, according to Orpheus." What? I thought. I'm running out of time here. I'm not in the mood to solve riddles. Unmoved by my plea for clarity, the mental voice replied with a poem. "When stretched beneath the lofty oaks you view Saturn, with honey by the bees produced, sunk in ebriety, fast bind the god." I pushed the button on the key marked 81. The door opened. Just then I heard a security bot approaching around the bend from the left. It quickly pushed myself and my chair through the doorway backwards, letting the door shut behind me just as the machine turned the corner. "Dennis, is that you?" Rosenberg slurred from behind me. I was silent. "What do I do?" I asked my informant. "What's the word, bird?" said Rosenberg. He sounded really drunk. "The rose gives honey to the bees," said the voice in my head. "That's the password." I repeated this phrase, a well-known Rosicrucian motto, though its meaning remains obscure. "Oh, Pamela," he said. "Oh, how lovely. Won't you join me for a drink?" I turned my chair around to face him, but I found that there was a divider made of glass brick behind me, obscuring the rest of the room. I wheeled around it. This brought me into the main chamber. The room was quite large, with immense ceilings, and a huge theater projector screen against the wall on my left. In front of this there was a long and exquisite black leather sofa curled into a C shape around the fat end of an egg-shaped black marble coffee. Here sat Rosenberg alone in a once white, now red-stained terry cloth bathrobe and nothing else, surrounded by empty and half-empty ceramic amphorae once full of blood wine. He looked up at me, then seemed startled as he looked at my feet, but he didn't ask me what had happened, so I presume he remembered hearing, or perhaps ordering, that my feet were to be cut off. He poured himself another drink. He didn't actually offer me one, which was fine with me. All I wanted in that regard was morphine. The room, which also contained 3 more leather couches, several leather seats, many more black marble tables of various shapes, several rows of bookshelves built into 2 of the walls, a 4.5-foot-tall porcelain wheel painted iridescent purple, and a metal dissection table on wheels, was completely trashed. In addition to more empty amphorae, other debris included used cans of Lyle's, empty canisters of poppers, discarded clothing, including black leather fetish garments, and small empty animal cages. On the dissection table, which was utterly covered in blood and gore, were the dismembered arms and legs of a small white male child with dark hair, aged about 9 years, strapped to the sides. The table had been used to do a vivisection. The hands were still clenched into fists, and the toes splayed outward in pain. The rest of the body, the head and torso, was draped around the top of the porcelain wheel, face down. It seemed to me that he had died quite recently. He had been dissected while alive, then positioned on the wheel and anally violated, from the looks of it. I could not tell if had been alive for that last part or not, but the tongue was bitten through. Next to this, on the floor, was a large crater, still full of blood wine and from the smell still fresh. I shuddered and looked away. "You know what I don't see," I said mentally to my informant, "are any keystones lying around haphazardly." I waited for a clue, but got only silence. Rosenberg was paying me no attention. He was staring at the screen in front of him and laughing as he ate something out of a white ceramic bowl. It was popcorn. I looked at the screen. He was watching an old black-and-white film, familiar-looking, with a Wagnerian score. At the moment I looked at it, a Continental soldier, sitting on a chair on the patio of a large house, had just put a 10-year-old boy on his lap and begun kissing him on the mouth. "I've seen this before," I thought, "in film school." "It's L'Age d'Or," said Rosenberg, still without looking away from the screen. "Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali." "Have you seen it before?" "I've tried watching it a few times," I said. "I always fall asleep." With that, he finally turned around to face me. "Neanderthal, troglodyte," he shouted, pointing at me and shaking his head as if to shame me for my lack of art appreciation. I was too high on morphine, and too much in shock from everything else, to care what he thought of me. I smiled and stared straight into his eyes. "Why don't you tell me what's so great about it?" I said. "Look," he said. He faced forward again and pointed the remote control at a machine against the wall. The film skipped to a scene of a man with silver hair and a pointy beard stuck to a ceiling next to a chandelier. "You see that?" said Rosenberg. "That's what happens to the Minister of the Interior in this film. That's a prophecy of what happened to Baron Carrickfergus." He rewound it a bit to show what led up to that scene. The Minister of the Interior was sitting at a desk making a telephone call to a younger man with a black mustache. They spoke in French, with the English given in subtitles. "You scoundrel," said the Minister of the Interior. "You are entirely to blame. You compromised me too. Do you realize that not one child survived? Many women and old men perished too." "You're bothering me about a few brats?" replied the man on the other end of the line. A crowd was shown running down the street as they were chased by the flow of hot lava. "Filthy ruffian, you've dragged me down with you," said the minister. His phone was shown destroyed on the floor next to his desk. Then we saw him on the ceiling again. We were back where we started. There was no explanation of how he got up there. Rosenberg pressed another button on the remote control. It skipped to a title that read, "The First Prismatic Articulation," followed by a scene of scorpions fighting. Those are the scorpions that the Mithraeum here and the chambers beneath are infested with. They are the scorpions that Luna sends to devour the testicles of the bull. The entire film is arranged to resemble the prismatic articulations of the scorpion's body. This refers to the prism that imprisons us. The prism that imprisons us. Did I hear that right? I wondered. "Then there's this," he said. He skipped ahead a bit. Now a crowd of people were gathered around a cornerstone-laying ceremony officiated by a man in a black top hat. Corn, wine, and oil were poured on top of a brick, then smoothed out with a trowel. "You see this?" he asked me. I nodded, bewildered. "The foundation of the holy city. Ab urbe condita," said Rosenberg. "Remember what Crowley wrote? Baphomet was Father Mithras, the cubical stone, which was the corner of the temple." The film displayed archival aerial footage of Rome, accompanied with subtitles that almost seemed like they explained what was going on, but they didn't really. The text said, "In the year 1930, on the premises occupied by the remains of the Majorcans, was placed on the sheer rock the foundation of the city of Imperial Rome. The world's ancient pagan mistress became the seat of the secular church for centuries. Some aspects of the Vatican form the firmest pillar of the church. Rome was founded on April 21st in 753 AD, I thought. This film was made in 1930. What the fuck?" "Now look at this," said Rosenberg. In the next scene, a man was seen walking out of a cafe, brushing bits of crumpled masonry off of his coat. Then, a few shots later, another strange title page read, "Sometimes on Sunday." Next, a row of buildings was shown collapsing. "The diverse and picturesque aspects of the great city," said the title page that came right after this. The whole scene reminded me of something. Wasn't there a part in 120 Days of Sodom, I said, about an aristocrat whose fetish was to make buildings that were set to collapse eventually, trapping women and children in the rubble? That's the holy city collapsing, said Rosenberg, ignoring my inference. Then a man was shown kicking a violin down the street and stomping it into pieces. Violence, I thought. Violence against violins. Stupid surrealists. Here, said Rosenberg, this part's about me. The man who brushed the collapsed building debris off his coat was now shown walking through a park with a flattish stone balanced on top of his head. He walked past a statue of a man with long hair, also shown with a similar stone on his head. Psalm chapter 118, said Rosenberg. The cornerstone becomes the headstone. The line in question, number 22, actually states, "The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner." This statement was also paraphrased by Jesus in Matthew chapter 21, verse 42-44, where he said that the rejected stone became the head of the corner, leaving out the repetition of the word stone. Then he followed it up with this, "And whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder." That was me, you see, said Rosenberg. I was born from a rock at rock bottom, from the dirt on the ground. And yet it is I who shall climb to the highest heaven tomorrow and sit on the throne of God himself. My head will be the keystone to the arch of heaven. You're drunk, I said. Drunk on that blood wine. Am I? Listen, my dear, he said, turning around and smiling at me, with a blood-stained Batman Joker grin extending from the corners of his obscene mouth. Human flesh and body fluids are definitely rich with chemicals that are intoxicating when ingested by other humans, or those who take their form. But that does not mean I am mentally incapacitated. Far from it. I am in a heightened state of awareness right now. Keep him talking, I thought. What do you mean you were born from a rock? I asked. Like Mithras? Pretty much, he said, burping. He got up to refill his glass. Then he walked over and made a bizarre swishing motion in the air with his hands as his robe flopped open. It looked effeminate and awkward. I thought he was just twitching, compulsively, but then the sliding glass doors to the patio opened on the farthest wall. I realized he was communicating with his digital ceiling. Cold night air came pouring through the open doors. Behind him, the sky was empty and black, but the black light was bathing his clothes and face, as well as the buildings behind him. What on earth is causing this? I wondered again. It's definitely something on top and outside of the building. I wheeled my chair closer so that I could continue to hear his confessional James Bond villain-style rambling. He was telling me things I thought I might need to know. I decided to goad him more. So you didn't have a human mother? I said. Some god just ejaculated onto a rock and you came out of it like a chicken from an egg? Not quite, he said. It was more like a Kinder Surprise egg. They're illegal in the USA, but in Europe you can buy these toys for your kids that come in tiny plastic eggs covered with chocolate. I'm familiar, I said. There are videos about them on YouTube. You can't avoid them for some reason. Yes, well, they're illegal, because really dumb kids have deservedly been weeded out of the gene pool by swallowing them whole, which often causes them to choke and die. Okay, I said. What does that have to do with who your parents are? Parents, you say? He snorted a laugh. That's for mortals. No. You've read the Gospel of Thomas, I'm sure. When you see him who was not born of woman, fall down upon your faces and worship him. And that's what everybody does. They fall down and worship me. He smiled. Even little St. George bowed down like his father and his father's father. I couldn't take it anymore. You motherfucker, I said. What's wrong with you? He stood up straight, looked directly at me with rage and stomped right towards me. So what if I fuck my mother? At least she produces seed from it. Glorious seed full of astral light and transcendental power. At least she has something more than just a vacuous, slimy hole that takes without giving. At least I'm not like your friends, the butchers, those stodgy old aristocrats who cut off their own dicks and feed them to their queen, their great mother. The only way they can cling to their decaying carcasses is by sucking period blood out of their mothers' pussies. Did you know that? So do the Sons of the Crown that the butchers have been propping up for 120 years. They call themselves princes. but they bow down to something as low and disgusting as a vagina." As he spoke, he gritted his teeth and bared them like an angry dog, with his teeth and the whites of his wild eyes gleaming brightly in the black light. It looked like he was transforming into a monster. I started to back away from him. "It is I who shall destroy the works of the female. Your friends at the Society of Butchers sacrifice bulls to the Great Mother because its horns remind them of her womb. But you and I both know that the Great Mother's womb is a tomb, because it is also a stomach. It is also the cauldron that cooks the meat that the stomach digests. It is a prison where we all suffer as slaves to provide sustenance to overlords whom we cannot see, because we are inside of them." He knows that I know about the Society of Butchers, I realized. What else does he know now in regards to that? His hands were balled into fists at his sides, and he stumbled as he continued to close in on me. He was truly enraged, though not at me specifically. I was relieved to confirm. He continued his tirade. "You see, I will bust out of here. I will bring each floor of this mansion crashing down until I find the father who has no mother. Then, and only then, will I find something worthy to bow down to." "So who were your mother and father?" I asked, wanting to bring it back to the original question. "You said something about a Kinder Surprise egg?" "Yes, well, the egg contained the makings of a golem," he explained, calming down. "It was prepared by an expert rabbi Kabbalist working for the Rothschilds. It was swallowed forcibly by the host. Then, after being passed through the intestines, it was fertilized in ano during a paschal rite by 108 freemen of the City of London, one from each of the livery companies at the time. Not the official ones, of course. They all have clandestine versions that operate, night works, as they call them, where these things happen." I recalled that 4th to 5th century Italian grammarian Maurus Servius Honoratus, commenting on Virgil, had said that the great god Pan, a satyr, was conceived by Penelope when she gave herself to all 108 of her suitors during one night of debauchery in the absence of Ulysses. I had written about it in my Baphomet book. Multiple fertilizations of the same ovum were not uncommon in the mythologies of ancient gods. "So you have 108 fathers?" I said. "I guess your mom was a real slut." He already hated women, so I wasn't sure this would rile him at all, but it was worth a try. I wished I could find a way of hurting him. I despised him so much at that moment that it was almost overwhelming. Then it got worse. He smiled that ugly smile again. "I guess you could say she's a debauched woman, even back when she was a little teddy boy taking a free titty mag from a stranger at Piccadilly Circus. None of the lads who strutted their asses around the fountain of counterlove were innocent in those days." So that's it, I thought. A sick feeling slid down my throat, like a cold cockroach swallowed accidentally from a can of Coke that's been sitting out since yesterday. I can't believe I didn't realize it before, I thought. But that makes Rosenberg. No, it's impossible. "You're telling me that Concivia is your mother as well as your wife?" I asked. "Civil partner," he corrected. "And Concivia was the Easter Sunday April Fool," I said. I put my hand over my mouth. Did I say that out loud? For a moment I panicked. He already knew that I knew about the Society of Butchers, I thought. Now I just gave away that I knew about the child rape movie from the 50s. He probably already knew I knew about that, which is probably why he mentioned it. But did he? Apparently so, for it seemed that nothing I had said to him upset him any further. He was smiling like the Batman Joker again. "Yes, my mother is quite a lady. That which does not kill us makes us stronger." "So where is she now, then?" I asked. "She's in the kitchen," he said, "where every great mother belongs, preparing for Easter." "So early?" I said. I wondered how people like Rosenberg and Concivia would celebrate the Lord's Resurrection Day. "Well, she's got to be at St. Paul's at the crack of dawn," he said. "She's leading Easter Mass." Outside of his window, I could see the gleaming dome of St. Paul's, which started to chime. From the number of rings, I surmised that it was 4 a.m. "I'm really overdue for a morphine shot," I said. "Well, then let me take you to your friend Thomas Weir," said Rosenberg, grabbing my wheelchair and pushing me towards the door, or as you like to call him, Leopold Black. "Did you know he was related to the House of de Blocas?" "What?" I said. "You mean Louis and Pierre." He wheeled me through the door and down the ramp through the darkness. "Yes, Blacas. he replied. "The family that collected the Templar artifacts that Hammer Purgstall wrote about. They are among the many of Thomas Weir's illustrious ancestors. When some of their descendants moved to the Britain, first to Scotland, they renamed themselves Black. It was his mother's maiden name. That's why he took it as an alias. Has it ever occurred to you that Louis Duc de Blacas may have been the inspiration for the Duc de Blangy in 120 Days of Sodom?" It certainly had not occurred to me, but now I had to think about it. The Duke was a Jesuit-trained aristocrat, entwined with the crown, essentially running the government in France as a sort of prime minister, and against the revolution. The Duke was accused by modern historians of faking the Templar artifacts he showed to Hammer Purgstall, covered with scenes of the sacrifice and rape of animals and boys. They claim he might have done this to make Templars, and thus the Freemasons associated with them, look evil, to discredit the Masonically inspired revolution. Since commencing my research into this topic, I had dismissed this argument. What a lot of work to go to for a roundabout, indirect jab at the enemy with no impact, I had previously thought, but I considered the fact that the Marquis de Sade had been a revolutionist, and had presented his obscene works as political commentaries. His debauched villains were always aristocrats like himself, or in the clergy. Sure, the Marquis was guilty of many of the crimes depicted in his novels, but his point was not merely to glorify rape and murder for the joy of hurting people. While he did accomplish this indirectly, his point, he claimed, was really to show the audience that this is what the ruling class get up to. Pasolini, in his modernized film version, had the same point. This is what Pasolini was truly persecuted for, I thought. The same was probably true of the Marquis. That's why he was in the Bastille, instead of being invited to elite parties, because he exposed them for what they were. Rosenberg, almost as if he could read my mind, and I'm pretty sure he couldn't, now mentioned the first film adaptation of the Marquis de Sade's novel, which we had just been watching in Rosenberg's privy chamber, although I didn't know it at the time. It was L'Âge d'Or. I had no idea that 120 Days of Sodom was the basis of the film because I hadn't read anything about it since college, and because I'd never been able to stay awake through the whole thing. I was astonished. Rosenberg continued to enlighten me. Did you know that the Marquis de Sade's manuscript wasn't published until the 20th century? And do you know who rescued it from the Cowans who were holding it hostage? Who preserved it? Who brought it out of hiding to take its place in the history of literature? His family, his descendants. They became the House of Noailles. They were patrons of the arts. They funded Dali, Cocteau, Man Ray, Jean Hugo, and Buñuel. Most importantly, they funded this movie, The Golden Age, the first film version of the Marquis de Sade story. It came out before the book even did. Didn't the Vicomtesse de Noailles let Cocteau get her pregnant? I said, making conversation with one of the few related odd bits that I knew of the subject. Yes, but that was no ordinary pregnancy either, he replied. And the child was removed from the womb prematurely for his own protection. He grew up with a camouflaged identity, sucking out sperm from the very cock that had spawned him, and he never even realized it. But that's none of your business. Just then, as we swirled around the ramp to the second floor, the black light came back and the ceiling lights faded out. I looked up at the giant sunroof behind Baron Carrickfergus. Now, with a better angle, I could see that full red moon behind him, the 3 circles now glowing purple and almost consuming its entire visible surface. Is the moon actually glowing from inside? I asked my friend in my head. She's pregnant with new light, came the answer. She's about to give birth to a new eon. Astronomy aside, it did seem as if the moon had something luminescing inside of it, and not just on its surface. The ancients called the sun and moon the lamps of heaven, I thought to myself. Can the moon really have a star in its womb? Can its skin act as a lampshade? If so, that would explain where the UV rays are coming from, but also why they aren't blinding us. Because it's being filtered, just like a blacklight at a nightclub. You're not far off, my invisible informant told me. As we walked, the ramp curved down towards the basements. The vortex was above me now, and I could see was the stiff, well-preserved body of little St. George, still floating face down, with his eyes shut and his mouth open into a scream, swishing around the revolting cocktail of shining sludge, like a lonely ice cube. The effect of the black light shining through it now was at once amazing and horrifying. As we went further down into what must have been the second underground level, I could see a glowing circle that was now in the center of the semi-triangular vortex. It had 3 concentric rings of glowing green fluid, a deeper green than how urine looks in blacklight. It resembled the stuff collected from Baron Carrickfergus by the drone. 2 of the rings were spinning clockwise, and the one in the middle was spinning counterclockwise, reminding me of the wheels within wheels featured in Marcel Duchamp's avant-garde film Anemic Cinema. What are those bright green rings in the center of the vortex? I asked Rosenberg. The seed of the sun, he replied. He gave him an injection so that his sperm would be stained with a fluorescent tincture. We just placed an annular container of ejaculate from Baron Carrickfergus into the middle of the vortex. Now I understood why his fresh semen was glowing in the bottle, even though it doesn't normally fluoresce when wet, and never bright green. So what's making them spin? I inquired. Nothing, he said proudly. Semen that is sufficiently rich with healthy sperm in large concentration, such as that produced by my own well-fed and well-sexed employees, naturally forms rings that rotate unpredictably in either clockwise or counterclockwise fashion when placed in suspension in an annular container. These findings were published by the Royal Society in October of 2016. In a report about research on the introduction of fresh ejaculate into a microfluidic chip for the purpose of nanotechnology development. Oh, I said. I stared ahead, trying to make sense of what he had just said. A few seconds later, I asked for clarification. An annular container? I asked. Like an anus? Anus just means ring, Pamela, Rosenberg replied. Yeah, I know, I thought to myself. Like Uranus. Like Uranus, he said. The Ouroboros, whose hog-tied body bent backwards, forms the circuit of the heavens. Hog-tied, I thought, like Baron Carrickfergus on the ceiling, like Director Pindar's headless corpse. Uranus is Ouroboros, the discarded, mutilated corpse of Saturn's father, wrapped around the concentrically stacked eons of the planetary archons, in the midst of which Earth is secreted, and within that, her womb, filled with monsters hiding inside like the baby hides in the pastry filling of a king cake on Mardi Gras. But if he's bent backwards wrapped around us, that means when we look up at the sky, we're looking at his ass. The same side God chose to show to Moses when the prophet asked to see his Lord. The only side it's safe to look at, according to God himself. The Gnostics said that Saturn is the highest sphere of the archons, but Uranus occupies the realm beyond that. Does that make him the highest god, even though he's emasculated and in most respects actually dead? Rosenberg began running as he pushed me around the curving ramp, below the lobby, into the subterranean corridor leading to the basements. The black light and glow-in-the-dark circles of the vortex blurred into the light of the digital ceiling. Then, at that moment, everything, even my perception of time and space, seemed to blur together in my mind. It was as though we had entered a tunnel of lights. Among the shining streaks that surrounded me, some seemed to be caused by luminous colored balls jetting down from the ceiling, all of various hues and sizes, each bringing a certain warmth and a certain humming sound. Then it seemed like the lights were behind us, both the streaks and the spheres. Yet we were still running, outpacing them. The fixed stars are descending to bathe in the blood of the archons and the blood of the innocents, said Rosenberg, jerking his thumb back over his shoulder. It won't be long before the child frees himself from his gestational prison. Is this the baptism of wisdom? I asked involuntarily, forced by the voice intruding into my mind. Rosenberg threw his head back and cackled. Yes, Miss Auger, this is their baptism into genital wisdom, as your translator of Hammer Purgstall's work rendered it. Zoogogon Sophian, in Greek or in Arabic, Matanasha, the carnal knowledge of good and evil, of generation into flesh. We are bringing down the lights of heaven with the rites of Eliseo. I've given them an offer they can't refuse. Like flies eagerly drowning themselves in honey, they know better, but they can't stop themselves. Rosenberg slowed his pushing and brought the wheelchair to a quick but gradual halt as he continued lecturing me on his evil plot to exploit the salacious and bloodthirsty proclivities of the gods so as to gain power over them. He already seduced them into human bodies and murdered them, I thought to myself. What else can he possibly do to them? And what does all this really mean? Rosenberg continued. These are the unalterable laws of existence in the present order of eons. Like a horny dog who smells a bitch in heat tied up to railroad tracks, or a cat who sniffed out a delectable puddle of antifreeze pulled up on a neighbor's driveway, there's no turning back. The fall has begun. Now tell me, my Virgil, where shall we go next? As my dizzied outlook came into focus, I realized then that we were actually floating in black, empty space, or so it seemed. I couldn't tell what we were standing on, if anything. "Where are we?" I said. "I thought you were taking me to see Leopold." "I've taken you as far as I care to," he said. "I brought you here so you could guide me the rest of the way. Now show me how to get there from here." Oh boy, I thought. Oh boy, I thought. Yet another test. Surely he knows which way to go. He's just trying to keep me on my toes. But I don't have toes anymore. I decided to consult with my psychic informant. "What do I do now?" I asked mentally. "Find the right door and go through it," came the reply. "And then nothing else." Well, I didn't see any doors at all, but I had gotten through 2 sets of crossroads so far by choosing the door in the middle. So I decided to look a bit harder for a door directly in front of me. I tried to clear my mind. I tried to look with spiritual eyes the same way I had heard the voice of the informant with non-physical ears. I tried to see with the same eye that had seen the shine on the picture of the bull liver at Oriental Club. This was the same eye that had seen the red glimmer at the end of the bull's intestines on the floor of the Mithraeum. As I pictured this last image, the eye that had spied it opened up again, and I now saw before me, off in the distance, a ruby red diamond, brilliant cut, just like the one from the London stone. It was giving off a pulsating red light as it rotated in midair. I knew that the red light was broadcasting a message to me, although I could not pick it up. Either I'm not equipped to, I thought, or I'm not close enough. I desired to be closer to that light, to pick up its signal. In that instant, Rosenberg and I began to float towards it. As it grew closer, it stopped rotating. Now it was situated at the top of an archway of gray stones. The portal within the arch was black, and I could see nothing beyond it, but we were headed straight towards it. Then suddenly we stopped right in front of it. "Show me your hands, please," said a voice overhead. "Please identify yourself." It was a feminized but artificial voice. The message was either coming from a robot or it was being translated by one, and it was coming through that diamond keystone in front of me above my head. I was picking up its signal. I put my palms out in front of me and looked over my shoulder. Rosenberg had vanished. I was on my own in front of the archway, in empty darkness. What should I say? I asked my informant mentally. Should I give my real name? "Identify yourself by your title," the informant replied. "Criphius?" I asked silently. "And Caducifer," the informant answered. Okay then, I thought. I announced myself, speaking directly to the keystone. "Criphius and Caducifer am I." "Then where is your heralding stick?" the keystone asked. I looked down at myself. I had nothing with me but a wheelchair, a hospital gown, and the set of keys I had stolen from Dennis. I examined each key carefully. I didn't see anything that qualified either one of them, even symbolically, as a heralding stick. This term was, of course, a reference to the caduceus, derived from the Greek word kyrikion, meaning herald's staff. I've never really understood how snakes wrapped around a stick represents a messenger, I thought to myself. I knew that many analysts thought it represented the human spine entwined with nerves, which was reasonable. I thought about putting forth my backbone as a reply. Then once again an answer came forth through my lips without my conscious awareness. I did not come here as a herald, but of mine own accord, seeking the light of the keystone. I said, "Then why did you have me say before that I came bearing a caduceus?" I asked my informant. "The caduceus is within," the informant replied. "Within my skin suit." "Yeah, I know," I said. I rolled my eyes. Now I will tell you this. The rape and murder I had witnessed, the maiming and dismemberment of my body, along with the deprivation of sleep, food, and water that I had endured much of the time on a diet of mostly morphine, all these things had taken quite a toll on my mind and physical well-being. But the constant dangling of cryptic clues by virtually all of the villains involved in this adventure, including my mysterious psychic intruder acting as mystagogue, this was what threatened to drive me over the edge into insanity. I'd rather the layers of the universe crash down into the abyss than to have to solve, learn about, or even think about another esoteric riddle, which at that moment I could have done without for the rest of my life. Or, if given the option of ending that life there rather than doing so ever again, I would have gladly chosen the former. So I said, I think I left my heralding stick inside last time I was in there heralding, hoping that a deadly laser beam would shoot out of the talking crystal and sever me in twain right there where I sat half naked with my bloody stump sticking out of my wheelchair. Whether this deadly guardian of the portal should cut me with her fiery sword of vengeance sideways or down the middle, it mattered not to me. But instead, by the sweet grace of Providence, that didn't happen. Rather, an eye, fierce with wisdom, opened up on the keystone, and a white light shot out of its pupil. It then split off into 7 rainbow-colored rays, 2 of which, on either end, I caught with the pupils of the eyes that had just opened up in the palms of each of my hands, still displayed next to my head with the thumbs pointed at my ears in the pose of surrender, as required. The key turned. I don't know what it was, or where the lock was, but the door must have opened, because the next thing I knew, I was inside. But so too was Rosenberg. Posing as the caregiver of me, the sad cripple, he had wormed his way in, right behind me, or shall I say beneath me, for I looked down and there was his face, directly below in the chamber that I was being lowered into on a plank attached to 2 ropes. Who was holding the ropes? I couldn't tell. I craned my neck up to look at them just in time to see an iron plate placed over the opening I had come through. The ropes had just been secured to something above. But I was not yet on the floor of the chamber. Instead, I was floating above yet another hole, leading down into endless darkness. Noxious, sulphurous fumes arose from the hole directly into my nostrils, heightening my opiate-induced nausea. However, that hole was in the floor of a room. I now regarded this room with curiosity. I looked for Rosenberg, but he scurried off into a corner behind me. Scurried? Yes, that's what it looked like, peripherally, like a scary tarantula scurrying off. But I thought that it was probably just the shadow of a spider cast on the wall by the light of one of the several torches that were set into holders along the periphery near the ceiling. I saw no other people, but all 4 of the corners of the chamber were dark, so I couldn't be sure. I decided to call for Rosenberg. "Mr. Rosenberg, are you here?" "No, Pamela?" said a voice from behind me. It was a familiar one, yet unlike any other I had heard with my ears before. It was coming from the corner behind me where Rosenberg had scurried. "No, Rosenberg, ISSSSS, not an HH here. He's afraid to come in here. I am not your jailer. I am your friend. And I am also in prison. I have been here for countless aeons, or at least they are countless to you." "I saw your face," I said, though I knew I was wrong. "When I first came down, I saw Rosenberg. You feel ha, his presence because ha, he's watching. And when you saw my face, it was SSS, so SSS, hawking that your mind immediately pasted over it with the last one you HH had SSSSSSS seen. The voice was so odd. It was like speaking to someone with a tracheostomy. It was atonal, gritty, and gasping, with the sound of air being sucked through a hole that was being plugged up every few seconds. "So let me see your real face," I said. "Are you SSSSSSS sure?" The voice gasped ominously. A wave of renewed fear washed over me. Suddenly I was filled with apprehension. "Yeah, sure," I said, clearly unsure. Still, I had agreed. The proverbial foot was in the door. I heard a rustling sound, like the sound I remember from my childhood of the animals getting up to greet me when I first walked into the barn at the crack of dawn. My eyes now widened with terror as I saw 2 feet step out of the shadows towards me, trailing bits of straw in their wake. They moved in a disjointed manner, scraping the stone floor underneath as they went. They were white with circular cuts made around each of the ankles, but I saw that they were both curved on the right, like human left feet normally are, which I found quite unnerving. Furthermore, the one on my right looked like that of an adult male, with black hair on the big toe. The one on my left had the appearance of a woman's foot, but was unusually large, a description that could have applied to the feet I had once possessed, just a day and a half previous. But then, the creature rotated its body a quarter turn towards me and another foot emerged on the other side, behind which I detected yet another. All 4 jutting out from the sides of this creature's body bore the ankle cuts, and I saw that they were all attached to legs that were clearly not their original partners. Yet it was what these legs were attached to that was most unthinkable. It was no wonder that my mind had pasted over it with a picture of Rosenberg when my abused and bewildered eyes first beheld this visage. What I was looking at wasn't exactly a trinacria, like the painting we had seen at Oz Pizza, but of course there were similarities. The head in the center had the pallor, leathery lips and sunken eye socket of one having been preserved after lying dead for a day, not that of a young boy happy to be of service as a table leg. I say eye socket in the singular to refer to the casing around the left eye, which was preserved. The left eye socket was covered with a black eye patch. Like a pirate, I thought, as I stared down in horror at the monstrosity, or the pirate mascot, the Jolly Roger. But it was also reminiscent of the Egyptian symbol of the Eye of Horus, pierced in mythic battle by his brother Seth, a long red line ending in a spiral, with the curvature and proportions of a Fibonacci spiral, but looking something like a shepherd's crook, was trailing out of the corner of the eye, having been carved into the flesh. As the creature, clearly artificial though organic, shambled the rest of its body out towards me, I saw the fullness of what the head and legs, actually 5 in total, were attached to. The main body was topped by a bulbous balloon of flesh stretched out to the point of partial translucency, like a frog that's been inflated by a sadistic little boy with a straw inserted into its rectum. Another living creature could be seen inside, red in appearance when viewed through the veil of pink skin. On top I saw what at first took to be a blowhole, but then, when the creature took a step closer, I determined that it wasn't really an opening. Not anymore. It was the former entry point for a feeding tube, a navel. What I was looking at was a white human torso, small, adolescent, yet female and pregnant, with the belly pointed upward, so that it looked a bit like the abdomen of a blood-swollen tick. But there were 2 lumps in the belly, one slightly smaller, so that it also resembled a 2-humped camel. Attached to this, with barely any neck, was the head of a middle-aged white man with brown hair pointed forward. On the bottom were the 5 legs. Yes, 5 actually, each connected to 5 feet taken from other bodies. You see, there were 2 legs on the left and 2 on the right, but now I could see that there was another one in the back that acted as a sort of kickstand, allowing the monster to kneel down backwards with its butt pointing downward. When the creature turned itself around again in the process of walking up to face me, I saw its pudenda and anus from the back, both enlarged and making a slopping sound as it walked. The anus, of course, was also enlarged through abuse. This is Philippine's womb, I thought, and the head must be that of Pindar, skull-fucked through the left eye. Then there was the matter of the feet. I wasn't sure who the others belonged to, but I certainly recognized the ones on the right as mine. Oh yes, I thought as my mind finally made the connection. My feet. Maybe if I get out of here alive somehow, I can have them reattached somehow. Do you have the key's SSS stone? The creature's voice hissed. Have it? I said. No. I think I saw it in the doorway, though. Which doorway? It asked. The arch made with 12 stone bricks and a red diamond keystone on top. I answered. The arch Kyria, the hellish voice responded. The outer doorway. That's it. I recognized this term. It was something I hadn't thought of in many years. But almost 15 years earlier, I had published a book about a French secret society called the Priory of Sion. Arch Kyria was the name of their inner order, which they also called the Arch of the 13 Rose Croix. Nobody has ever determined the significance of the term. Kyria might be connected to Kyrie, a Greek word meaning Lord, but this doesn't seem to elucidate the meaning much. Did it SSSSS speak to you? The thing asked. Yes, I said. It asked me some questions. It told me to put my hands up and identify myself. Good, it responded. That means that it's Klaus. What do you want with it? I asked. I want to be relieved of my burden, it said. I want to get out from under this SSSSS weight without everything collapse SSSSING on top of me. The Keystone's job is to take my place so that I may ASSSSSCEND on CCCCE again to my rightful abode. And where are you now? I asked. I said you because I had decided I didn't really believe that this creature and I were actually occupying the same physical room at the same time. In Tartarus, it replied, in the CCC center of everything, bearing the weight of it all. So is that what you want Rosenberg for? I said. Are you trying to get him to take your place? Have you been grooming him for that with your psychic manipulations? And me? I was pretty sure I was looking at the thing that had been talking to me psychically for the previous 2 days. Or at least, I felt that the possessing intelligence was the same, and that the head in particular had been used as its vessel or touch point this whole time. The addition of the other body parts was clearly more recent. We are all playing our role, the creature said. Now you do your SSSSS, caducifer. It turned its hideous backside towards me and sloughed off back into its straw bed in the corner. When do you give birth? I asked. Easter morning, came the reply. You mean today? I said. Now? Almost, it answered. Then I heard the lid of the chamber behind me open. I felt the ropes being tugged on from above, and just as suddenly as I felt the ropes being tugged on from above, and just as suddenly as I had entered, I found myself on the outside of that room, or rather on the outside of some room. I'm still not sure if it was really the same one.